Happy holidays from the Behind the Bells podcast.
Marker. And action.
This is Behind the Bells, the show that takes you behind the magic of your favorite Christmas movies and shows. Within the background of every Santa Claus, reindeer, and stocking is a story. Where did it come from? Our Christmas movie expert will unravel all of that and give you the full story. Sit back and enjoy another episode with Robert Nicholas.
Merry Monday, everyone, and welcome to Behind the Bells. I'm your host, Robert Nicholas, and I'll be taking you on another one-horse open sleigh ride into the world of Christmas movies. But you know what? We've got more than a movie for you. We got more than a whole bunch of movies for you. More than a whole bunch of TV specials, more than books, more than movies. No, we got the whole Christmas caboodle here because we've got a really interesting interview today. An interview from a guy who cares about the holidays so much that he has compiled everything he knows about Christmas movies, books, music, traditions, world traditions, all that good jazz, all into one book. So I have the very distinguishable honor of bringing on my very first guest, the author of the recently released The Christmas Book, Ed Daly.
How are you, Robert? Thanks for that great intro. That was, I need you to sell my book for me.
Good. I'm glad I can help out with that. So anyway, Ed Daly, let me first asking, what does Christmas mean to you? Like, how important is the holiday to you?
It's one of those things that I from an early age to now, I still get the same feelings. It still hits the same notes with me as whether I was 5 years old hoping to get a bicycle or whatever that is. And I love how I put it in the very beginning of my book, but the speech by Bill Murray where he kind of goes off the rails at the end of Scrooged, and he says, for a few hours out of the whole year, we're the people we always hoped we would be. And to me, that's Christmas in a nutshell. That Christmas to me is like the best of who we can be and who we are to each other. And everything from charitable giving goes up to people kind of reassessing where they're at and what's important and reaching out to the people that are important to them and being with people that are important to them and who they love. And to me, it's like it's the one time a year where we can get our priorities straight, and I still have that childlike excitement that has never left me. So yeah, that's Christmas. Christmas is everything for me.
Yeah, because that's actually how I kind of see the holidays for myself. I mean, even though I'm a 34-year-old man, but I've never lost that spark for the holidays myself. Though we can't deny that Christmas during childhood and Christmas in adulthood are almost two different separate things. And I think a lot of it is because for a lot of people, especially the teenage 20 years, for some, they tend to kind of drop off just because as the childlike innocence tends to end and the adulthood starts to come on, there's this bit of an awkward period in between the whole two different Christmases. And that's when I'd ask, the next question, once you entered your teenage years, did you ever have kind of an angsty period where you just weren't as into the holidays?
I know I was supposed to, but no, I mean, I didn't, it wasn't that I was dying to go sit on the mall Santa's lap when I was a sophomore in high school or anything like that. But I always would sit back and try to enjoy my favorite movies and enjoy having a decorated house. And then in college, at Christmas time, I'd play some music or have put up some lights in my dorm room or something. But, I obviously it was that was less celebrated at that point in my life. But then I'm a little older than you and I have kids. And then that then I was able to re-jump into everything. And it was like I was almost like a sommelier choosing what my kids, oh, you got to check this out, and you got to see this special, and you got to watch this movie. And it has been really fun to kind of re-enter the childhood years through my kids. I do enjoy, the having kids and everything, but I would say just having someone that you're going to share traditions and memories with is exciting enough. It's not that you need a 2-year-old. I remember when I first got together with my wife, and that was the most excited I had been in a while for Christmas, because I had somebody that I was really going to nail to get the right gifts. It's currently for me, the main goal is for my kids, but yeah, it's really anybody, just finding something. I mean, it's really just, like I said, it's assessing your life at that time of year. And it's great.
Well, good. So anyway, speaking of, both of our passions for the holidays, you clearly loved the season so much, you wrote a book about it.
I did.
So exactly, when did you first get the idea to want to start writing the Christmas book?
So I last year I released a book about world history, for best and worst people from every era of human history. And it could be very uplifting in parts and dark in other parts. And it was a ton of research over the span of, on and off for years, 5-6 years. And maybe I came out with it last summer, and then I tried to promote it through the end of the year. And then at maybe a month after Christmas, I had some thoughts about Christmas, maybe some Christmas specials or some Christmas things and maybe in the back of my mind, I had never really articulated my thoughts, but I wanted to maybe do some freelance columns about some Christmas specials. I feel like TV is not quite as covered in some of the Christmas books I've seen. You see some movies, you see maybe some Rankin Bass, but there were lots of aspects of Christmas that I thought I could put my own spin on it. And then from there, I started thinking, well, I also have more questions I'd like to answer. And I just kind of worked backwards from there. And I realized, well, it's January, and I'm not going to pitch to these publications about writing some sort of column about Christmas. Maybe I have the idea for a book, and I think I probably mentioned it to my wife, and she's like, no, that sounds like a cool idea for you. You definitely are interested in all of these aspects of Christmas, and you should go for it. And then I just dove in, and I consumed a crazy percentage of everything I consumed was Christmas for most of the next 6 months. And so if I was exercising, I would have an old episode of Christmas on TV, of like an episode of the Bob Newhart show, or I had some old version of Christmas Carol, and I just took notes on all of these and then tried to organize it and come up with a game plan on how I would map it out. And so I divided it into sections, and TV is one of them. Movies are one. Fashion, food, the origins of Christmas, the origins and the evolution of Santa Claus, traditions we do, and it was easier to dive in because I wasn't researching coming from a world history book. I was researching very dark and mysterious characters from time to time. Like I could write about Gandhi, but then I also had to write about, horrible people in World War II. And it was like everything was kind of the same kind of vibe. And it was a lot of fun, but it was also a little bit odd because nobody around me was thinking about Christmas as much as I was. and it would be March and April. And I'm having the songs, I'm writing about all these songs, and I'm having these songs in my head, and I learn about the origin story of this song or that song. And it's, it's the middle of spring and nobody else around me is talking about it. So it's kind of fun to think that I'm going to once again start hearing it more in public. I mean, I'm starting to see after Halloween, you start seeing it in commercials and in stores, but in a few weeks, it'll be mainstream Christmas again. And so that's what led me to your show and a couple of other podcasts, because I was like, it's a very lonely existence for me. I nobody in my immediate life is talking about Christmas, and it's May and April. And I was just trying to find if there's aspects of Christmas that I needed to brush up on, or this is something I hadn't really thought about. And through some different searches, I found podcasts dedicated to Christmas, and I stumbled upon yours, and I think we have a fairly similar taste in some of the Christmas movies. So like, I've never heard anybody really talk about The Ref, and you did a 2-part thing on The Ref, and I was like, yeah, that to me. Like I said, I'm about 10 years older than you, so I saw The Ref in high school in the theater, and I was like, I think I saw it on opening day, but it was like March or February or something like that. But yeah, there are movies like that I was glad to see you covered, and I learned things along the way, and it was a fun thing to have on the side. Like, it was like I was having conversations with people that also thought about Christmas not in the month of December. So it's been fun getting to know your show.
Yeah, and that's a nice thing, because when I initially started my show, I thought I was just going to be one of like maybe 4 or 5 others that did a year-round show. But then as soon as I kind of got inducted to the whole Christmas podcast network, there were a whole bunch of us that really wanted to cover our own stuff related to the holidays year-round. So I'm sure it had to be a good feeling for you to know you're not the only one.
Yeah, it's nice. It's like you found it's like the old days of the early days of the message boards and the internet, and you find people and you're like, oh, that's somebody who's like me in a different area of the country or a different area of the world. It has been fun, and it just, I was going through the editing process, and I was thinking, well, I should certainly reach out to the shows that I listen to and people that I feel I have similar viewpoints on things that, they would kind of understand where I'm coming from. And so it was great. And I reached out to you, and I was like, I haven't heard you have guests, but I'll take a shot and see if you wanted to have somebody on.
Yeah, because what's funny is that the only other show that I've been on at all, anyway, as a guest, is the Totally Rad Christmas. I don't know if you've spoken to Jerry.
I did an episode of Family Ties Christmas with him about a week ago, and it was great.
Awesome. But yeah, because the one thing I really liked about your book when I was kind of skimming through the variety of chapters, I mean, I knew you were going to cover the typical variety show stuff, the Bob Newhart stuff, Perry Como, all the good stuff. Right. But I was also glad that you really pulled out a lot of the deep cut stuff, like Christmas in Pac-Land or the He-Man She-Ra Christmas special, or I mean, maybe like 10 years ago, this wasn't as infamous, but now so many people know about it. The Star Wars holiday special.
Oh yeah. I had heard about it when I was a kid. And to me, I was thinking, I'm a huge Star Wars fan as a boy. I had all the figures, and they're like, oh, there was a special, but you would there was no internet in the 80s that I could jump on. There was no YouTube. And so I remember thinking like, oh, it can't be as bad as they say. And it can't be as like weird as everybody says. And I finally got to it on YouTube, however long ago, 10, 12 years ago. And it's bonkers. It's crazy.
And allegedly, out of everything that George Lucas has ever introduced into his whole world of Star Wars, that's like one of the few things he's personally ashamed of.
Yeah. he tried to destroy everything, but as he should have known, once the internet gets hold of it, you can't destroy everything.
Right. And I think that's actually that's one of the few good things about the internet is that, even though it's gotten your fair share of weirdos and wackos that have gathered together, it's also allowed, guys like us to gather together to really know that there's a lot of other great people that, also love the season and are willing to dig really deep to find not just, the cult hits, but even some of the really bad stuff that people really attempt to hide their hardest, such as Santa and the Ice Cream Bunny.
So I'll just say right now, you asked me about that. Of all the research I did in my book, I'd never heard of that. And so I watched it for the first time yesterday. And I mean, I would always had the intention that I will have to try to update this each year as there are new specials, but I didn't even think about something from the, early 70s. That is absolutely going to have to go into the book. That's the craziest special of all, I think. It's as weird as any Ed Wood movie it's so bizarre. Yeah.
And, hopefully, maybe something like that I could see more information of if you ever do a second edition of the Christmas book.
I have every intention of writing about that. It's crazy.
Yeah, which I will also ask this. When you initially started doing the Christmas book, you said you were initially looking to cover more of the TV specials. And when you started writing it, were you only intending to cover the movies and TV specials?
No, I originally thought, maybe I'll write about some of these wacky Beverly Hills 90210 Christmas specials. There was one that they did It's a Wonderful Life twist on it. And I was thinking, well, I've never seen anybody write about it. And I was just thinking more in terms of like a freelance column for somebody and, one of these retrospective looking back at this Christmas special 25 years ago, that type of thing. And then I realized there's so many things that I'd like to write about, not just TV episodes and you covered it, but I was thinking a movie like The Ref, I would like to include that in a list because you have all these, you're always going to see, and I'm not saying it doesn't deserve to be there, but It's a Wonderful Life is going to make every single Christmas list, and Miracle on 34th Street or Elf. And I like all those movies, but they're always in there. And so there were some that mattered to me more. And I also like several adaptations of A Christmas Carol. And so I thought, well, let me see if I can figure out what the top 100 of those are. And I added that to my book. So it quickly went away from just being a TV thing. I wasn't, I was thinking about doing a TV column or, a think piece about, but once it became a thought of being a book, then I knew I had to do everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I get that too, because like you were saying, there's so many adaptations of A Christmas Carol. That alone could be its own book as it is.
Sure.
And then last year, during the earlier stages of my podcast, when I was doing my whole Christmas canon thing on my social media page, where I always try to find some famous stuff, some not as famous stuff to kind of discuss very briefly. And in fact, one of those days, I actually did a double feature of old cartoons that had their own Christmas Carol specials. One of them being Ghostbusters, Xmas Marks the Spot.
That's right.
Yeah, and I actually thought that was and I actually thought that itself was a pretty good retelling of its own version of A Christmas Carol. And
I think I had it pretty high on my list. I liked it. I thought it was a solid one.
Yeah, and then the second one I covered was the animated Back to the Future series. Did you cover that one?
It was something a Dickens of a
Dickens of a Christmas.
Dickens of a Christmas. Yes, they go back to Victorian London, and it's Ed Neezer Tannen.
Yeah, which makes you wonder just how many ancestors this guy had. And I mentioned that one was a situation where the side story of Marty having to play all the ghosts to try to redeem Ebenezer Tannen was much more interesting than the other one with Doc's kids getting kidnapped by a
losing the key. Yeah.
Yeah,
I did like Marty's side story. That was better.
Well, I think that was just more of a situation where for Doc's story, they just wanted to do their own version of Oliver Twist.
Right.
Hence the title Dickens of a Christmas.
Right.
But yeah, it's and of course, as soon as I posted about it and all my other friends, are seeing that, they're like, I didn't know the Ghostbusters or Back to the Future did their own Christmas carols. Where'd you find this stuff, Robert?
I mean, back to what we were saying about the wonder of the internet is, yeah, you can find stuff like that. But I also found like one of the first ever silent films that was a Thomas Edison production silent film of A Christmas Carol. That's on YouTube. You can find a 1920 version, a 1912 version, and there's so many things, and everything's on the internet. And you can find a Sanford and Son episode from the 70s, or an episode of any 80s, 90s sitcom, Urkel, anything. You can find anything on there. It's amazing.
Exactly. And of course, even half the time, I'll even come across other internet reviewers that, find material that even I would have not even gone out on my own to look for myself, whether it's because I Santa and the Ice Cream Bunny was something that I discovered through somebody's internet video, as was, something that came out 2 years ago called A Karate Christmas Miracle.
I saw that, but I didn't. I had to draw the line somewhere with certain things because I wanted my book to be under 1,000 pages. So yeah, I had heard of that one. And I was like, I heard about it late in the game, and I thought if I do another version, I'll check it out at some point. But I have not seen that.
Right. Yeah. And of course, speaking of drawing that line, given that you obviously had to draw the line because you found so much information to put in your book, what would you say was your best source when it came to finding all this information to compile into the book?
It's laughable, but I would say the best starting point for things, and then it led to rabbit holes that I fell down and found more. The best starting point really is Wikipedia, because somebody like I don't know if it's specifically there, but if you say versions or you say sitcom Christmas episodes, and Wikipedia is going to point you to 500 right there. And then you can say, oh, well, I see these shows. I wonder if there's something else there. But the starting point, I didn't use Wikipedia as I never quoted Wikipedia. But if you say, oh, so if I found a Dickens of a Christmas through there, then I would go on an actual targeted search for Dickens of a Christmas. But I stumbled upon a lot of things through Wikipedia that somebody had posted up there, and it turned out to be something great. But yeah, I would say I owe an unhealthy amount of my starting point for information from Wikipedia.
Yeah, and what's funny is that maybe 5 years ago, just 5 years ago, I would have told people not to use Wikipedia as a big source, since for the longest time, anybody could just put up whatever they wanted up there until they started changing a lot of their rules a bit more recently. Right. And now that people had to start citing specifically where their sources came from.
Right.
Which is also why, ironically, I've started telling people that if they wanted to find specific information about Christmas movies or TV shows, do not go to the Internet Movie Database trivia page, because that too is another page that anybody can add whatever they want on there.
I would say that, yeah, that I've been misled more on that one. Like I went through IMDb, and I remember it one time pointed me to, that Miami Vice had an 80s Christmas special. And then I did some real digging, and it's like, no, they never had a Christmas episode. But yeah, I thought IMDb would be a little more, on point. But Wikipedia, it again, I never quoted it, but it told me, okay, look in this direction, and and then it's up to you to find out if it's real or not real. But it was always a good starting point.
Oh, good. Yeah. And plus well, I mean, first of all, I wish there was a Christmas episode of Miami Vice, because I'm sure that would have been fascinating had they.
Yeah, I was thinking, all the possibilities. There's always cocaine, so they could have had some sort of snow scene with the cocaine flying through the air, like True Romance or something like that. But no, there was no Miami Vice Christmas special.
Yeah, I mean, I'm guessing it would have come out something similar to a Shane Black movie.
Yes. But a fun fact about me, when I was about 9 years old, I was, you can see the back of my head in one of the final scenes of an episode of Miami Vice, because I lived down in Miami for a couple of years while that show was being filmed. And so we went out to dinner and they're like, hey, we're filming over here. My parents signed some sort of waiver if you'd like to be there. And, you could never see it was me, but I knew where I was sitting and you could see the corner of my head.
It's not every day you get to tell people I was on Miami Vice.
Yeah. And I don't even think Don Johnson was in the scene. It was like Tubbs and Edward James Olmos or something, but I'll take it.
Whatever helps with that situation. But yeah, I guess my other question, though, given how you obviously put a lot of work into the Christmas book, and you said you just did a historical book that went through history.
Yeah.
How long have you? I was going to ask, how long have you really been into writing for?
So about 10 years. My background, I went to school for business. I was on Wall Street for a decade. I was in, I worked, right out of college, I worked for a shipping company, and then I was at Wall Street. And I think just at some point I realized that I wanted to have a creative outlet, but it's not that I was a kid in high school that was writing on the side or doing anything like that. I just over time realized I want to do something. Maybe I wanted to do something funny or something, I don't know, something creative. And so you always hear like, write what you know. And I had a buddy who knew a publisher, and he had just written a book for them. And I was like, well, let me pitch to them. I'll write a book about breakfast cereal because I really know breakfast cereal. And it worked, and they bought it on the pitch. Like I didn't know how the book business worked, and my first ever pitch worked, and they bought the book, and I made a book about breakfast cereal. So that was about 10 years ago. And then from there, I did a lot of freelance columns, and but one of the columns I worked on, it was for a New York-based website, and I was talking about the history of New York and people talking about the good old days and how, New York isn't what it once was and this and that. And I don't like, it's one thing to be nostalgic about something. I mean, we're talking about Christmas. Christmas is all about nostalgia, but I don't like people kind of rewriting history. And so I wrote a column about New York, check out all the great things that New York has to offer right now. And let's point out that there was a garbage strike for a month and a half and in this era. And I started pointing out the good and bad in these things. And then that led to me thinking, well, I could probably do this about human history. What was the good and bad in the 1930s, in the Civil War era? And it just became this big thing. And it's a probably 650-page book about the best and worst people in every era of human history, starting from ancient history all the way to last year.
Yeah, I get that, considering that a lot of people, whenever they reminisce, I mean, it's one thing to certainly reminisce. I was a kid of the 90s, and I often think about a lot of the good stuff, even though there are obviously a lot of not so good stuff as well. And plus, I had another friend of mine back in college who was really obsessed with the 1920s, and yet he obviously chose to weed out some of the negatives, like polio and all that other jazz.
Yeah, but I also I wanted it to be. I just thought it was a kind of a good counterbalance, good and bad. But I left that book feeling optimistic because have individuals that do bad things, but just think of from when you were a kid to now, all the possibilities of what's out there now. It's pretty amazing. Technology has exploded in the last 30 years. And so it was a celebration of people, but also like pointing out like, hey, Henry Ford, yeah, he's a famous guy, but also he did some bad things too.
Yeah.
And so I tried to kind of balance it back and forth, but it was dense. It was a lot of things, and it was on and off for like over 5 years. And so I guess I just, like I said, subconsciously getting into this year, I was pretty much done with that book because it was out last summer, and maybe I promoted it through the end of the year, but then it was kind of like 2021 hit and I was ready to start something new. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, let me go with something I love, but something that's a little lighter, something that's, it's just about positive. There's no Hitlers in my book. I mean, yeah, there's the Star Wars Christmas special, but different kind of bad.
Yeah, I get that. But I really liked it about yourself because, even though I do appreciate certain people that, want to tell their, a different side of history, the revisionist history type areas or so that,
yeah,
obviously in their eyes, want to do a lot of good, but often focus so much on the negative that by the time you finish reading some of those books, you almost, close the book thinking, man, I just feel so terrible. I don't know what to do now or so. And yet,
right.
I do like how you really wanted to balance that out. And of course, with Christmas, even though, like a lot of things, there's always pros and cons to, a lot of that stuff. And there's even pros and cons to the other holidays around that, including Hanukkah and Kwanzaa.
Yes.
But again, I would find it really hard to walk away from any kind of holiday book saying, man, now I feel really bad about myself.
No, yeah. And also, the climate of COVID, and it's been, everything has been political over the last few years. Like, and writing a history book, if you get to modern times, if you write about anything that happened in the last 50 years, you're going to be accused of being political in some way, shape, or form, because what is good and what's bad. There's two different news sources for everything. So, and I just wanted to move away from that. It's not that I'm disavowing what I wrote, but at the same time, I didn't want to be controversial. I wanted to be entertaining, and it was I wrote essentially a loving guidebook to Christmas, and I'm sincere throughout, but I do point out, this one didn't work so well, but it's all is all done out of love. That I love the holiday. I love consuming all of it. And back to the television thing, I think when you're 8 years old on a Saturday night, you're not hitting the town, you're watching something on TV. And whether that's the, Family Matters Christmas episode or in my era, Back to the Future, Family Ties, Christmas episode, like those were very important to a kid. Or the Disney Channel or something. So I wanted to capture all of that, and still, talk about a little angle that not everybody knows about It's a Wonderful Life or Miracle on 31st Street. But yeah, I wanted to cover a little bit of everything.
Yeah, I get that, because when I started my podcast, that too, I initially set out with my goal to essentially make that just a fun, relaxed, safe space for those that didn't want their show to really ruin anything or cross over anything. Like when I did my first part on Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, when I started doing my Facebook advertising on that, I actually got bombarded with at least 4 different comments first from people that were pleading, please don't ruin this.
I found your take on it to be interesting, and maybe it's and maybe it comes down to our ages, because I think the 90s brought an explosion of content through cable channels and videos and stuff, that there are more choices. So when you first approached that Rudolph episode, you were talking about how it really wasn't a big thing with your childhood.
Right.
And to me, that was like the stop motion Rankin Bass, Rudolph, like every kid I knew. But I was born in 1976. And so what was available for us was just a lot less. And so that, of course, you had to know Rudolph. So it was ingrained in me before I remembered the first time I saw it probably when I was 3 or 4.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember seeing it when I was 7 and 8, but I already knew everything about Rudolph. Like that special was so much a part of my childhood Christmas. So it was interesting to hear your take on it. You were viewing it with a pretty fresh set of eyes, which I had never. I mean, again, like when I was in first grade talking to a classmate about it, that wasn't a fresh set of eyes. You were actually giving us a fresh set of eyes. So I thought those episodes were fascinating. And yeah, you weren't taking anything down. You were just examining it from a different place, though. It's interesting because you never ever. I recommend everybody if you're coming into this show a little late, go back to that episode because you're taking an honest look from a fresh set of eyes on Rudolph, and I thought it was very interesting.
Yeah, and like I said, well, as you were saying, that was just one of the few options available, considering that when Rudolph and the whole Rankin Bass thing ultimately premiered, animation, at least on the theatrical scale, had really been scaled back because at that point it just been way too expensive to produce on such that elaborate of a level. Yeah. And even though people will look at the Rankin Bass stuff now and see it as kind of corny looking, but once you really set your mind to the point where it came out of, it's actually a lot more impressive than people would have expected, especially if they really understand what it takes to produce stop motion animation.
Yeah.
And of course, as I mentioned too, that because I had a lot of options and people would ask, oh, did you grow up on Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Frosty the Snowman, and all the other Rankin Bass stuff? And I'd be like, yeah, I've only seen the Frosty the Snowman thing. All the others, I've not seen any other bit of the Rankin Bass stuff. And I tell people, these are not the Christmas specials I grew up on. The ones I grew up on were like the Rugrats Christmas special, the Doug Christmas special, or the Ren and Stimpy Christmas special, or even the Darkwing Duck Christmas special.
Right. There was a lot more content from the early 90s onward. There was just way more content. So that stuff just became, that happens to be on CBS one night a year, but there's a million other things available throughout the month of December that's going to be there for you. So it's just different. I was in high school when you were college, when you were consuming some of this stuff. And so I didn't really know Rugrats until my kids watched it 6-7 years ago. Like I never watched Rugrats before that.
Yeah. And of course, what I also really appreciate is the fact that, even with this newer content, people still love the classics. In fact, one of the big stories I remember from last year was when Apple got the exclusive rights to all the Peanuts stuff and CBS or whatever channel typically does do Peanuts announced that because Apple has the rights, we're not putting it out this year. And there was just a big backlash against that. People were just very upset that they now can only stream it, that, you can't watch it on TV anymore. You got to stream this. And then I guess I got bad enough that PBS finally announced that they struck a deal with Apple to get the airing back on TV.
It's crazy. Yeah, I was going to say, I saw a headline about this yesterday or the day before about PBS. Yeah, they finally got one night a year. You're gonna be able to get this, but yeah, people want to see it on CBS for some reason.
Yeah, I mean, even though in my book, a lot of the stuff I do watch is through streaming or through whatever Blu-rays I still own, and of course, because I also do own Blu-ray copies of all the Peanuts, like holiday specials. Like I pop those on whenever I want. But for a lot of people, that's just become such an annual tradition for them to just sit down as a family and just watch it on TV. That even in a weird way, maybe starting this year, I've started to really understand just the whole viewing aspect as something special. Because if you go on YouTube, there are actually fully recorded versions of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer from 1992 with the same commercials still intact. And In case
Yeah,
you
and
ever want your own little nostalgic time machine there.
Yeah, it's very hard, unlike other aspects of culture. It's very hard to separate nostalgia versus what you actually like when it comes to Christmas. Like, people, they love a song, but it's also it's a song that reminds them of the year they got Super Nintendo. And there's this Christmas special when I can remember sitting on this couch next to my grandmother watching this special at this time at this place. And so nostalgia is baked into everything on Christmas. And I objectively will watch new Christmas movies, and some I like more than others, but I have a hard time separating the thing I loved when I was 9 from as an adult. It's hard. It's nostalgia really it rules the whole genre.
Exactly. It's kind of like how whenever I see like an older Disney movie that I grew up on, because one of my favorites as a kid growing up was always The Sword in the Stone. And of course that one, I'm always going to have a love for that. And even though I do like the newer Disney stuff that is put out, I like Frozen fine. I like Moana fine. I mean, they're all good movies in their own right, but they're just never going to really wash over the nostalgia that had already set in for the longest time for The Sword in the Stone. Even though as an adult, I have grown to see some more of the flaws that the movie does have compared to the more modern stuff, or even some of the other classics that came before it. But that in no way is really going to knock it off my list of top Disney movies that I enjoy.
Right. Yeah. You can't disown one of those things that you loved as a kid, even if you can recognize certain things don't work as well. But I mean, if you look at Star Wars, so much backlash is always rooted in people it's not living up to their childhood expectations. And I loved the original Star Wars, but if people want to talk about the dialogue being perfect in 1977, just look at a supercut of Princess Leia's lines and you'll be like, what she's saying is insane. Like, these are not great. These are not well-written lines, but you loved it when you're a kid. And so then you're applying it to Jar Jar Binks lines and stuff like that. And I've tried my best to not judge the newer Star Wars based on the old, because you'll drive yourself nuts. Like, you're thinking that it's the same as when you're 8, and it's not. Nothing is.
Yeah, and in fact, because I for the longest time, I too was one of those kids who always assumed that Star Wars, or at least the original Star Wars trilogy, was the greatest thing. And then once I came to finally sit down and watch Star Wars: A New Hope again, I totally forgot about that one line. I should have recognized your foul stench, which to me was just such a Disney line. But it wasn't until I found out later on that George Lucas had literally set out to do his own Disney movie, given that he's always said that he wanted to do his own family-based sci-fi story, or space opera, I should say.
Right. But I mean, I'm by no means trying to bash Star Wars. It's more just I recognize that there's a nostalgia part of it that clouds my judgment of really, what was great about those movies and what was, ordinary.
Yeah, and that's the nice thing about Christmas, because the holiday itself is almost just built around nostalgia. There are so many different types of nostalgia that people have around the holidays that there's never really a set, like this is like the official thing you need to be doing around the holidays. And even with whatever tradition people do, still do, I always come to really appreciate that with the small stuff they do, it's still, their own thing. Whether it's the one family that goes all out and goes nuts in the house, or the one guy who gets the Festivus stick from Seinfeld and just calls it a day. And I still have to admire that guy for his creativity.
Right. I love that people can pick different things, or I know people that expats that I live near, that their thing is, I mean, they're from Netherlands, or they're from France, and they do things differently because that's where their Christmas came from. But it's cool to see the different ways but ultimately everybody still, there's an element of goodwill towards each other, and there's an element of family and caring, and even though they're all different ways of getting to that same conclusion, the ultimate message of Christmas, I think, is pretty universal.
Definitely. So having said that, now that we got into those traditions, it's now time to go into your specific traditions, because you are now going to be a guest on my very first ever infamous Christmas survey. Now, these are going to be 40 questions of just some of the most random film, TV, whatever from the holidays. And the good news is you don't necessarily need to know anything beforehand. This is all your opinion. And this is just have fun. This is not going to be about me. This is all about you, because we all just want to know what you would have to say about each of these different Christmas scenarios. So,
all right.
You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. So the first one, what was the first Christmas movie / TV special you remember watching?
The first one I remember watching, I believe, was March of the Wooden Soldiers with Laurel and Hardy. And it was, I think they used to show it a lot, probably for rights, free rights of the license running out. But they used to show it a lot on Channel 11 in New York. And I remember watching a scene where they were going to order. He was supposed to order 601 foot soldiers, and ordered 106 foot soldiers. And I thought that was the coolest thing, that these like giant wind up 6 foot soldiers were going to fight. And then I remember revisiting it, and there was a whole lot more singing than I remembered, and like weird love scenes. But I do remember those soldiers were the coolest thing to me when I was very little.
Yeah, because I see ads for it all the time, but I've yet to sit down and watch it. I mean, maybe I will finally add it to my Christmas canon this year and give it a watch.
The Simpsons did a pretty funny. The episode is called Skinner's Sense of Snow, and they get snowed into the school on the day before the Christmas break, and Skinner shows them, and all the teachers are like, they bailed on the day, and so Skinner's there with the students, and he's like, I'm going to show you a classic Christmas movie, and the kids are bored out of their minds because of all the singing and the bad sets, because it's the days of Laurel and Hardy, and it's pretty funny how they make fun of it. I mean, there are still some funny like Laurel and Hardy slapstick moments, but I'm not sure you're gonna love sitting down with that one.
No, I'm probably okay with that, because believe me, I've sat through some bad stuff, and I will say, in relation to that phony movie, I think it was called The Christmas That Almost Wasn't But Was, or
yeah, The Christmas That Almost Wasn't. That's one of the more bonkers ones.
Yeah, which I will say, I don't know what's sadder, the fact that all these kids had to sit down and watch that movie with Skinner, or the fact that this was Skinner's favorite movie growing up.
Yeah.
Because now I'm afraid to ask what his other top 10 would be.
Oh, yeah, very disturbing.
Yeah. So, number 2, what is your favorite adaptation of A Christmas Carol?
So I rank 100 in my book, and I really do. I think it's no coincidence that it keeps getting remade. I think it's a terrific structure that can be adapted to modern times. And we talked about the Back to the Future cartoon can use it. The Ghostbusters can use it. Sitcoms can use it. My favorite is Scrooged with Bill Murray. And it got very uneven reviews. And I think, it's tough to, there's 2 reasons why it really stands out for me. One, I was 12 in the movie theater when that came out. And if you watch the credits, he's talking to the theater and he's saying, all right, the women on the left side of all the women sing, all the men sing. And I was sitting in a theater and people are actually interacting with Bill Murray on the screen in a movie theater. I'd never had a movie experience like that. And so I loved it because I was 12 and it was everything. It was Peter Venkman from Ghostbusters is playing Ebenezer Scrooge. And I mean, that was everything that mattered to me at 12 years old. So I recognize it's tough to separate that for anything, but I do think it hit on it. It really put an late 80s spin. This was right after Wall Street had won Best Picture and Gordon Gekko and Greed is Good. And it was hitting on many of the notes that Charles Dickens wrote the story for. He was seeing the rich-poor divide grow, and he was seeing a lack of charity and an embracing of greed in society, and all about resetting what our priorities are at Christmas. That was the goal of Charles Dickens. And I thought Scrooge hit those notes well. And I thought the casting of that movie was terrific. And I thought Bill Murray is terrific in it. Some people say that he's too mean in it. I thought he was being Bill Murray. He was funny, and I loved it. That's my favorite version.
Yeah, that's a good version.
If you want to talk about like classic versions, I do agree. Alistair Sim in 51 or whatever, he's excellent. And Jim Carrey is playing Alistair Sim essentially in the animated, the Zemeckis version. So I recognize that's the gold standard, but to me, Scrooge is the one I love the most.
Yeah, and I get that. And the good news is I, too, happen to really like Scrooged. And in fact, one of my earlier episodes, I also covered on how that whole thing had a very troubled production history with Bill Murray, the two writers, and Richard Donner all clashing all head on in this project.
Yeah.
And, given how all those egos together are probably not the best thing, it's amazing that we got a movie that good.
Yeah, and it was very interesting, your episode, talking about how they just let the cameras roll and Bill Murray's riffing at the end, and they didn't think they'd leave it in, or was it Donner wanted to keep it in, but Michael O'Donoghue didn't, and there was fighting on that. But I thought, I don't know. I mean, again, 12-year-old me thought it was the greatest thing in the world, so I don't totally know how to separate it, but I still love watching it every year.
Yep, and it's also one of the few Christmas Carol adaptations to be Oscar nominated as well.
What for adaptation, or what was it?
Oh, for visual effects.
Oh, visual effects. Okay.
Yeah, I mean that's why it technically counts as Oscar nominated.
Hey, it's something.
Yep. So number 3, if you get the choice to visit your Christmas past, Christmas present, or Christmas future, which one do you pick?
So I think most people would love to revisit the past, would love to go see when they got that bicycle, and love to go see loved ones that are no longer there. But what I love about Christmas and watching these movies each year, and the to me is the buildup. And so I think I would choose present, because there's an excitement that builds until Christmas for me, that it's like everybody would love to go check out the past or go check out the future. But the thing I love about Christmas is the anticipation. And I enjoy, Christmas is the goal, but Christmas Eve to me is like the culmination of all the excitement building over the course of the year to that day. So I love I'm sticking with the present.
Okay. So anyway, back on A Christmas Carol, given how many adaptations there are, and of course, one that a lot of people like, including myself, is the Muppets Christmas Carol. So,
Yes.
So what I want to know is, given how well they did on the Christmas Carol, and though not necessarily a Halloween special, I really like their Haunted Mansion special. What other holiday story should the Muppets retell?
So what was so great about that Muppet Christmas Carol is the casting of the Muppets. Like, they really were in perfect roles. And they did do a special that was It's a Wonderful Life. They did It's a Wonderful Life special, and it's not that it was bad, but there were a lot of celebrity cameos, and it wasn't as tight it wasn't like a fully tight story. So they've already attempted that. I think if they casted it right with the right roles, I could see Christmas Vacation being a fun version for the Muppets.
I could see that. Because that was what made a Christmas Carol, at least the Muppets version, work really well. That, even though they could have, either gotten like many more human actors to play the other roles, which they smartly didn't. The Muppets were just so well casted that I even once debated myself, did they make this whole movie just so they could make that one joke with Fozziwig?
Yes.
Yeah, because I'll bet that the whole movie was just made just so they can make that one joke, and then they just moved on from there. Especially considering how for the Muppet Christmas Carol, rather than recasting the ghost with the other Muppets, they conjured up brand new Muppets for those characters.
Yes. Yeah, they did.
Which was also a bit of a gamble, because I think that was the first major Muppets project that was worked on after Jim Henson passed away.
Yeah, that was what year is the Muppet Christmas? 92 or so?
92 or 93. It's one of those.
Yeah, and he died in the late 80s or 90.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it really was. It really. I love the casting of that movie.
Okay, so question 5. For given how many different, Scrooge we've seen, including, Bill Murray successfully pulling off Scrooge, what other actor / actress do you think you'd like to see casted as Scrooge?
So there's so many directions you can go and have gone. You can go funny, or there have been darker versions. And I was trying to think of who would be somebody that's not bringing too much of who they are as an actor. Great actor, but Robert De Niro is going to be Robert De Niro in something, right? And there's a ton of actors like that where they're them. And I was thinking of, who are some of my favorite actors? I would like to see Michael Shannon play Scrooge in something. I think he would be the kind of that he could play a dark, but he's can be funny in things. He's kind of oddly funny. Even his character in Boardwalk Empire, which was not a silly character, but there was a funny aspect to how weird he was.
Right, because I think people noted that too when he played General Zod in Man of Steel, and of course, so many people were quoting the "I will find him" part, which. That's something I want to know, whether he was trying to play off as intimidating, or whether even he knew that might have come off as a little hammy.
Right.
Yeah, and but I do get what you mean when it comes to different actors that can play a whole bunch of different sides of Scrooge. And of course, in my book, I've always preferred the Scrooges that are much darker people that end up becoming good. And that's why I've always thought that one actor who, not to say that he's old or getting up there, but I definitely would love to see this specific actor play Scrooge before it's too late. I want to bring in the Spawn actor, Keith David.
Oh, love him.
Yeah. And
he's one of those guys that if he pops up, you get a smile, this is about to be a cool scene.
Exactly. And then, of course, not to go too off of a tangent, of course, when he got to play the villain in Princess and the Frog, he quickly became one of my favorite Disney villains.
He's awesome. He's really great in everything. And it could be a tiny role in a not very important movie at all. And he just brings something great to it.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it, too, is because somebody once made this comparison that if Morgan Freeman was playing New Testament God, Keith David was Old Testament God.
That's a great one.
So anyway, speaking of dark retellings, 2 years ago, the BBC did a much darker retelling of A Christmas Carol. So
super dark.
Yeah.
Super dark.
And so speaking of which, what other Christmas movie or Christmas story would you like to see get a much darker adaptation?
So we talked about this a little bit before, but I think you could still tell, you could still have a lot of the same story being told if you made The Ref a really dark movie, and you could flesh out bad things before the fateful night, and you could have bad things during that fateful night, and you could still have a situation where a family is re-examining relationships with extended family, with each other. You could still have that, and it could be it could be a more intense version of the ref. And I really like that. I like lighthearted. I like the Jim Carrey Zemeckis Christmas Carol lighthearted version for the most part, but I like the BBC dark version too, because it was like, okay, so we're thinking, how much does somebody deserve to be redeemed? You know, like what forgiveness is somebody owed at some point?
Yeah, and to be fair, I myself actually didn't care for the BBC version just because I thought it strained a little too much in the dark and not as much on the. Because to me, the rightful kind of adaptation of A Christmas Carol knows how to bounce just enough on the dark and Christmas factor, but people want a little bit more dark. I'm certainly open to that interpretation, because I will say that the one Christmas story I've always wanted to see maybe not necessarily a like super dark, but maybe just with a dark vision. Like if Tim Burton were to get the reins, I've always wanted to see like a Tim Burton retelling of Babes in Toyland. Okay. Just to see what that whole, how dark you can make that whole toyistic atmosphere. And in a way, in probably the strangest way, when they redid Babes in Toyland for NBC, they attempted to go for a much darker Barnaby type character. Right. Which comes out much more unintentionally funny than spooky. Yeah, I guess, to me, it seemed like a funny version, but it was an attempt at being a scarier version, I guess. Mm-hmm. But but I like how you'd want to see a much darker version of the ref. In a weird way, it also kind of reminds me of how some people have asked for like a dark R-rated Home Alone, which listen, Home Alone, I love it. But it's pretty dark if you think about what's happening to these people. The burglars are really in bad shape. Well, that's why we now get a lot of those internet videos where real doctors will watch it and say, okay, worst case scenario, instant death. Right. He's going to need a skull replacement. Yeah. Yeah. And then, of course, there's also that popular internet theory that Kevin from Home Alone grows up to become the Jigsaw killer in the Saw series. Yeah, I've seen that one. Yeah. Right. Now, speaking of other stories, now we're going into the right area. We've got for question 7, we got 4 different famous holiday stories: Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, the Nutcracker, the Polar Express, and Babes in Toyland. Which one goes? I'm getting rid of Babes in Toyland. Okay. The other ones are so baked into my whole life. Babes in Toyland, like I said, the first Christmas movie I ever saw was the Laurel and Hardy version of that. Mm-hmm. And then I remember the Drew Barrymore version and the updated TV version. But to me, it was one that never really registered with me. So if I'm picking something that has to go. Yeah, and I agree with you, because whenever I do see the Disney version, which it's honestly been about 6 years since I've seen the Disney version, but even then I was kind of wondering to myself, just how many modern children would still get into something like this, given how, even though the Disney version, at least the 60s Disney version, is still like the most revived for a lot of people. But even then, that one actually has a much more operatic kind of tone, and in a way, much more old fashioned, and not even the good kind of old fashioned, more like an antique kind of old fashioned. Yeah. There's so many things for kids now that I guess I struggle to see where that fits. Right. Yeah. And, I'm totally on board with you on that one. And who knows? I'll eventually have to cover the various different versions of Babes in Toyland, and I could probably go into much more detail, considering that at least some of the behind the scenes stuff I read on the NBC version is honestly much more interesting than the actual movie. Yeah, I'm sure. Now, going back to Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, in my episode, I covered how, even though we see the character a lot, he's rarely ever featured a part of Santa's actual lineup. And So for question 8, do you count Rudolph as a part of Santa's lineup of reindeer?
I don't. I think Rudolph is its own thing. And if you're thinking about Rudolph, that version, if you're thinking about Rudolph, to me, that comes with the baggage of Hermie, the disgruntled dentist elf that comes with Yukon Cornelius. But when you're thinking about Santa, it's the even number of reindeer, the 8 reindeer leading the way, and you don't really see, when you see the silhouette of Santa in the sky and stuff like that, you rarely see the red nose.
That's true.
To me, I just, Rudolph is its own special, its own thing, but I think of the reindeer as the 8 reindeer.
Right. And of course, I mentioned before that because Rudolph is one of the few Christmas entities that's technically copyrighted, it's always been much more difficult than it is worth the effort to even try to get him. If, like, let's say you get a figurine maker that wants to include Rudolph in the set, it's like, do I really want to go down that whole legal loophole of just including him?
Yeah, true.
I don't know.
True. Yeah, I'll just take the old story that's free for me to use.
Yeah, and anyway, that's what I'd even would bring up. But in the modern era, wouldn't Santa eventually found time to put headlights on a sleigh?
Well, you don't. When you're a kid, you don't ask the questions. But I mean, the guy lives in the North Pole. He wasn't used to a snowstorm. He needed one magic reindeer. So yeah, I would think he would have already had that thing planned out for hundreds of years before then.
Right, and of course, speaking of Santa, and not to think too hard. Question 9: Can Santa Claus time travel, or does he make his journey all in one night?
I prefer to think of it like he's a veteran quarterback that time slows down for him, and that he's moving, he's doing the same things that we think of from the 'Twas the Night Before Christmas poem. He's checking this and that, but he's moving at a blur that we can't keep up with. The regular human eye can't keep up with. So,
yeah, I kind of see that as so. It's almost like we're going off of Santa Claus the movie logic when the elder elf was the one talking to Santa on just how it all worked for him. The whole time travels with you sort of thing.
Right. Although I did find it. I kind of liked the Arthur Christmas adaptation where they just roll in on a massive spaceship and the elves are prepping everything like crazy with the grappling hooks and everything. I thought that was kind of a fun version of it.
Yeah, and I like that one too. Just don't. If you ever go on the Tis the podcast, don't tell that to Anthony. He hates that movie.
I've heard.
And of course, because of that, people will not stop sending him like cardboard cutouts of him next to the Arthur character. So that's something I usually tell people. Never ever tell them your least favorite thing. But yeah, and I definitely like to go off of that. Maybe not necessarily time travel, but time travels with him sort of
right.
Situation. But anyway, also speaking of Santa, we've seen countless portrayals in different styles of Santa Clauses. You know, some upbeat, some older, some grouchy. So anyway, for question 10. What is your favorite, or at least a few of your favorite portrayals of Santa Claus?
I think my favorite portrayal is Edmund Gwenn, who I believe is the only Santa to win an Oscar for being Santa.
Yeah.
I think there's a certainly a sweetness, but a mischievous element to him. I think he's likable, but not over the top, sweet. That he's just kind. He gives off a good vibe. There are great versions. I mean, you know, I love the movie Bad Santa, but would I say he's the best Santa, or is he the best mall Santa? Where, you know, like I don't know how to put that. I don't know how to do that. Or just like I love Lewis Winthorpe crashing the Christmas party and trading places, but he's not Santa. He's just a guy trying to rob a Christmas party and start trouble. And then given that he just passed away, Ed Asner plays a good Santa in a ton of things. Like I Googled it. How many times did he play it? And I saw like, oh, he's been Santa 4 times. No way. He's been in a ton of times, like for voiceover work, or obviously people know him from Elf, but he embraced that Santa for many years. He was in a lot of like random TV shows or things as Santa, and he was great.
Yeah, and I actually like how he covered those different specific areas because, I mean, first of all, when it comes to like those specific mall Santas, that's almost a different category itself because Billy Bob Thornton would go into the same category as the guy from A Christmas Story or
that's right.
Or even the one guy who plays the coach on the Wonder Years who Kevin found out was briefly a mall Santa.
Oh, right. Yes.
And of course, and I will say, Edmund Gwenn is a great Santa, even though I did not see that version of A Christmas or Miracle on 34th Street until about 6 years ago. Because for the longest time, based on nostalgia, I'd always seen the remake of Miracle on 34th Street, which has.
But again, that's based on when you were born. So if I grew up in the 80s. And so that version wasn't out yet. So the version that they'd play every year on TV was Edmund Gwenn. So to me, that was the version that I liked the updated version. But to me, I already had my Santa from that movie.
Yeah, and I get that. And of course, because of that, I am. Because of my own nostalgia, Richard Attenborough's portrayal as Kris Kringle / Santa also ranks pretty high on my list. Even though I do recognize some of the. I do understand why Edmund Gwenn's performance won the Oscar, and his performance is exactly deserving of that Oscar. It's just that when I see Richard Attenborough's like portrayal of how he is with the other kids or so, that's kind of how I really want to see Santa, especially during that moment where he's able to sign with that one girl. Which, whenever I see that, I'm thinking, man, I would find it really hard for someone to look at the scene and say, "I hate this guy."
Yeah, right. He's wonderful. Yeah, I mean, how could you feel anything but love for the guy?
Right. And then, of course, one of the more other controversial opinions that I had is that Douglas Seal, who plays Santa in Ernest Saves Christmas, his Santa, I actually thought was actually pretty good.
Yeah, he's good. That movie, again, if you're a kid of a certain age, maybe you appreciate it. But that movie, I think it came out when I was in college, so I'm not. Does not register for me.
Yeah, which is totally fine. In fact, on my podcast, I even admit that the movie itself. Even though I loved the movie as a kid, as an adult, like I cannot really defend it that much anymore. But the nostalgia factor still kicks in. But even when I see Douglas Seale's performance, even though he is given not that much good material to work with, he still tries his hardest to play the Santa that you'd want to get out of the guy or so.
Yeah, he plays it. You're right. He plays it in a pretty solid way, considering he's just supposed to be the setup for Ernest P. Worrell.
Yeah, and I even went into my podcast went into detail that the original script originally had plans to have Ernest become the next Santa, but the folks at Disney just could not fathom that idea, and so they changed it so that Ernest was helping Santa find the next guy, which ironically kind of sidelined Ernest in his own movie. Yes,
that's true.
But yeah, I get that. Those are all good choices. So for going on Santa, number 11, Santa's Workshop. Whenever you've seen all these different portrayals of the workshop, do you usually prefer seeing it as like one of those old world, like wooden style factories, or do you picture something much more modern?
I think it doesn't make a lot of sense for the old timey wooden workshop, but it's kind of how I imagine it. So I look at it like the way Elf did it. I thought was pretty cool because they had the old timey feel, but they were making modern toys.
Yeah,
on the assembly line. And so I thought that was a terrific way to merge the two, that kids aren't getting wooden trains, unpackaged wooden trains. They're getting something that looks like a toy today.
Right. And I think Elf might be one of the very few movies that actually shows like modern, like copyrighted, authentic toys that children want to get. And I mean, I don't know if it's also a copyright issue when it comes to other, because I'm sure that the last thing they want to do is go into this detail on how, the North Pole can't make this because we don't own the rights to Bob the Builder or Dora the Explorer.
Right.
But again, that's just a nice little detail that Jon Favreau at least pointed out, that very few North Poles actually showed the toys that would be made during that era.
Yeah.
So, I guess in my book, I see mine honestly a little bit closer to Arthur Christmas, given how over the years they would have had to modernize certain aspects, but maybe not Apple Store modern as portrayed in the movie. But
yes,
that's but
that movie. Again, we've talked about that. It certainly isn't a hit with everybody, but to me, I like that it was like, well, we really need to modernize this operation, but there still has to be a love and sweetness behind it, and a caring that big machines might miss somebody. And I think that's the best. To me, that's the best animated kids Christmas movie.
Yeah, and plus, fun little side note: the week that the one came out, on that Friday, I went to go see the first release, which was Hugo, that Martin Scorsese movie.
Yes,
and then that was the same week that the Muppets, the Jason Segel Muppets movie,
right,
and Arthur Christmas all got put out, but they all got beaten out by Twilight Breaking Dawn Part 2. And I thought, I hate these kids. But yeah, I actually like that perspective. Now, going on with how your book has actually been smart enough to cover some of the other gift givers around the world, yet it's made me realize that only now we're really starting to try to tap into some of the other nations' traditions around the holidays or so, especially now that Krampus has been made. So what I want to know is that should they get their own TV special or even a movie, what other nation's gift giver do you think has a story worth telling?
Forgive me because I can't remember his exact name, but I would go with the Japanese guy with the eyes in the back of his head.
Oh, okay.
I think that'd be kind of fun to see what angle they could play with that. I would think it would have to be some sort of animated special.
Well, if it's Japan, would that mean?
It would be anime. But I mean, if you want to think of a fictional gift giver, it's not a nation's gift giver. I always loved the SNL sketch with John Lovitz as Hanukkah Harry. Maybe do a fleshed out version of him with his three donkeys.
Huh. It's funny you should mention that because at some point I have plans to cover both the Animaniacs and Pinky the Brain holiday specials.
Oh, yeah.
And one of them actually brought up Herschel the Hanukkah Goblin. And I'm thinking, okay, I want to see that special somehow.
Oh, amazing.
Now, speaking of monsters, this is something else you also covered in your book, other different dark sides to the whole St. Nicholas mythos and storyline. What other, even though we've already had Krampus for, what question was it? Sorry.
13.
Oh, yeah, 13. What other holiday monster do you think deserves their own movie / TV special? So
I think the Icelandic Gorilla and the Yule Lads is very interesting. There's 13 different Yule Lads that show up starting December 12th in the lead up to Christmas, and they're these kind of unsettling elves before Santa elves were thought of as these like helpful, friendly beings. Elves used to be just troublemakers, and the Yule Lads are they can be weird, like the spoon licker, and he'll show up and lick your spoons, or the sausage swiper, the bowl licker, and then there's the door slammer, and one with sheep legs, and they give people headaches, and they do weird things, and it's a very odd to me, because I didn't grow up with Gorilla and the Yule Lads, but yeah, the Icelandic tradition of Gorilla and the Yule Lads is pretty bonkers, and it could certainly make for an interesting special if you saw all these troublemakers at work.
Because I'm already picturing it almost like a maybe strange cross between Gremlins and Problem Child.
Yeah, exactly. It would be it. I could see them just running amok. They'd be like your recent special. They'd be like those gingerbread men in Krampus that just start attacking and doing crazy things like that. That's what I would think Grilla and the Yule Lads would be like.
Well, if I ever come across Joe Dante one day, I'm going to have to pitch that of the Yule Lads.
Yeah.
But speaking of monsters, for 14, we got a Krampus question, and of course, this has been controversial amongst people that either like or don't like the movie. For 14, within Krampus, was Max's family spared, or did they all perish?
So, from listening to your take, I get the feeling you think it's like it was a reset, and you better cherish the spirit, or bad things will happen again.
Mm-hmm. I
kind of viewed it the pan out at the end of the movie to be, these people are in like purgatory, and they're just going to constantly be tortured, and this is their new reality, and they're all gone.
Which I get from a lot of people which for some makes an even more twisted ending. It's just that the only argument I've ever had against that, including myself, is that when Max looks out the window, that Christmas morning, we never really see that glass reflection of any kind that would have indicated that they're in a bubble or so. I mean, maybe I'll have to watch it like a ninth time to really make sure that I didn't see that or so.
Right.
But in a weird way, I think, even though obviously, at least in my version, he's spared, but knowing that he's going to be watched for the rest of his life, in a weird way, I even see as kind of a creepier ending. Because that would still make your holidays. That would make your holidays very uncomfortable if your whole family knew that you're going to be under this microscope for the rest of your lives.
You better be on your best behavior, or else. That's not like a happy-go-lucky ending. I'd prefer it if I thought that was the ending, but just my first instinct was like, oh, when they pan out, I was like, oh, it's already over for these people. That was just my first thought.
Right. And obviously the film's, ambiguous in that nature. And
yes.
And I'm not sure if director Michael Dowery has ever said otherwise or so. I'll probably find that out as I'm doing more research on the whole writing process.
Sure. But, it's cool though. I like that we're getting an ambiguous, scary, it's not a Christmas slasher. It was its own thing. And really, Gremlins is the only thing that is sort of similar, but not the same thing.
Right. And of course, that was kind of the whole point of Krampus, was that Michael Dowery had set out to do his own Gremlins style family film. He never intended it to be another typical slasher movie, probably because he already knew that when it came to Christmas slashers in general, they were always very hard to brand and market for a lot of studios. And because I think I read some there for that I think it was for the original Silent Night, Deadly Night, that when that one came out, there were a lot of protests around that.
So I was about 8 years old when that came out, and they advertised it. I mean, when you're 8, you don't really know much about anything going on in current events. I remember like the parent council going crazy because they were advertising during NFL games. And so they're showing Santa like whip out a knife or whatever in the commercial, and people went bonkers. And it was Siskel and Ebert. I write about it in my book. Siskel and Ebert called it, any profits from that movie are blood money, and it just disappeared until it reached cult status. But people went crazy over that movie.
Well, because that's when I would have told that same group of people, if you guys don't like this, then you may not want to watch Human Centipede.
Yeah. Well, I don't think 84, their heads would have exploded if Human Centipede came out in 84.
Yeah. And in fact, again, not to go off of another tangent, but I was mentioning in my episodes on the ref that given how maybe not necessarily twisted the movie was, but given how it had much more of a uncomfortable family dysfunction kind of vibe to it, I kept thinking, had the movie come out like maybe 10 years later, would have and around the holidays, would have had a much better chance at being a big hit? I think there were so many reasons why it came out in February or March. That March. Always hurts. But the acting in that movie is superb. That
you had real characters doing something uncomfortable, and it to me it worked very well. And I think you're right. I think the audience wasn't really sure what they're getting, and you talked about even the marketing of the movie. They weren't really even sure. They just did like Dennis Leary MTV commercial ranting kind of stuff. They clearly didn't know what they had in that movie.
Yeah, and that's why I even went through my theory that I think they originally intended to put it out around the holidays, like the year before, but along with the new ending that had to be reshot, given how crowded that whole holiday season was becoming, and how I think Disney or Touchstone was suddenly realizing, wow, this is a big gamble for us. I think they kind of chickened out of trying to put the only Dennis Leary led movie out and put it out in March, thinking, we can just put it out here just as a Dennis Leary vehicle. Maybe we'll make some money off of this.
Right.
And of course, I can't prove that, but that's just my own theory.
No, that made perfect sense to me. That I can't figure out what was going on. The poster, everything. It just doesn't quite add up.
Yeah, but who knows? If I ever come across the writer Richard LaGravenance, maybe I'll ask him about that. Since the original director of the ref had unfortunately passed from a drug overdose.
Yes.
Ted Demme.
Yes. Right.
Now, speaking of other darker Christmas aspects, for question 15, what's another Christmas toy that you could see becoming an object of horror? Because we've already seen like a killer robot come to life. We've seen an angel on top of the tree come to life. We've seen a Jack-in-the-Box digest a teenage girl.
The most terrifying thing I saw was not intended to be terrifying, but there was a Cabbage Patch Kids special where it was like an animatronic Cabbage Patch special from 2003 called Vernon's Christmas. Oof. And they moved around like Chuck E. Cheese band animals, like the singing, and it was terrifying because they have the dead eyes and they were moving back and forth, and it was terrifying. And I think there's a reason why the Child's Play kind of terror aspect. I think any sort of doll come to life is always going to be pure terror, a toy that comes to life and terrorizes you. And even though the intention of those Cabbage Patch Kids were good, it still had a vibe of like, oh, one of these dolls is going to whip out a knife any second.
Well, maybe that's proof they didn't really test market the thing enough to really understand. Maybe this looks a little creepy.
Yeah, it's on YouTube, but I don't think anybody should watch it if they want to avoid nightmares.
Okay, then it's going to end up going in the same category as that attempt at a live-action Teddy Ruxpin TV show.
Yes.
But anyway, speaking of Child's Play, for 16, Child's Play, is it a Christmas movie?
I always thought that was a birthday present.
Well, it is set around the holidays.
It is. I don't think it is, because I don't think there was any. I don't know, and maybe I'm off, but I always thought of it as a birthday present that went wrong, and there was no. I don't remember any Christmas music or anything focused on Christmas. I just remember it as like the birthday present that went crazy. I don't know.
Well, anyway, speaking of Christmas monsters, for 17, the Grinch. At least in your opinion, is he a symbol of Christmas joy or Christmas angst?
I think he's a symbol of Christmas joy to me. I think it's about people or someone who loses their way. And if you're talking about the original story, not the Jim Carrey fully fleshed out backstory, I think it was supposed to represent people who don't really totally get it, and finding that spirit and finding the joy. So to me, it's about discovering Christmas joy.
Yeah, and I see that. Considering that every year when we get more Grinch merchandise, like on the T-shirts, we always either get the, bah humbug or I hate Christmas, which to me almost contradicts everything.
Right. That's not the message.
Right. Yeah. and that's why I always like hearing whether people, truly see the Grinch as, this is why I wear the Grinch t-shirt. I don't care for Christmas, or, oh yeah, the Grinch. That's a classic special I love.
Right.
But yeah, and I too see that as a symbol of Christmas joy. I just can't see myself going around wearing a grumpy Grinch t-shirt with him, saying, resting Grinch face, or whatever Karen shirt was designed or so.
Yeah.
But anyway, for question 18, from the original Grinch story, was the Grinch's actions justified?
From the original, no, but it was why it was beloved and famous. I don't know the time difference between the book and the Chuck Jones special, but the book, he's not even green. He's black and white, and they kind of touch on this in Elf when there's a problem with the printing, and Walter, James Caan, is like, all right, we'll just still kick it out even if it's missing a page. Children's books, they don't really give you a lot of backstory to anything, and so you don't really know what this guy's deal is. You just know he hates it. And the special, why it's beloved is, why the book is beloved is because Dr. Seuss was a master with words and playful words, and it's fun to go on that journey, even though he's not saying that much. Hop on Pop or any of these, he's rarely saying that much. He'll have a good message in the Lorax or something, but for the most part, he's just playing with words, and he does it in a real cool way, and there are cool pictures. And then the original special, again, you don't really know. He just keeps talking about why he hates it. But Boris Karloff and the booming voice of Thurl Ravenscroft, or the Tony the Tiger voice who sings the song, it's what makes the whole special that people love. They love that song, and they love the vibe they get from it. But I thought the Jim Carrey Grinch, the Ron Howard one, was kind of unfairly criticized because they gave this whole backstory, and they're like, oh, that's not what the Grinch is. The Grinch, really, there wasn't a ton to it. You didn't know why he was. So no, I would say his actions weren't really justified in the original book and special, but then the movie, I think they gave a pretty solid reason to me of why he would hate it.
Yeah, and I think that's often the troubling thing with even doing a Grinch movie of any kind, because at least with the children's book and the animated specials, those were always the right length to, force the viewer or reader, if reading the book, to paint their own idea on why they think the Grinch might hate it. And personally, from the books, I always just saw him as just a grouchy old man who's just heard it so much and so much, they just doesn't have that much spirit. Yeah. And then, of course, with the movies, they attempted to give him his own little backstory. And again, the Jim Carrey Grinch movie is, I would say that one's a guilty pleasure of mine, a movie that I know is severely flawed in the various places, but I still like that one.
I do. I feel the same way. I just think like they had to give him a backstory because there was nothing. He was just grumpy in the original, so they had to give him a reason for like where this is all coming from.
Yeah,
but I just kind of viewed it like they described the Joker in The Dark Knight, where Alfred, I think, says that, some people just want to see the world burn. That's kind of how I felt like the Grinch from the original special. He's just not into it.
Yeah, and that's just sometimes the hard thing when it comes to adapting children's books. When you kind of have no choice but to expand on certain characters, you're never going to make everybody happy with whatever you get.
Yeah.
So speaking of the Grinch for 19, let's say we got a brand new Grinch movie coming out, animated or live action in your mind. Who would you cast this time as the Grinch?
I think it would have to be somebody who's physical and funny, because I think you gotta be kind of weird, but you gotta be physical. And I was thinking, who do I know? Who can I think of? I think Kate McKinnon from Saturday Night Live would be kind of a fun, weird, physical comedian.
Yeah, that would make for a very different interpretation of the Grinch right there.
Yeah.
Because, in my mind, well, like I said before with Babes of Toyland, I mean, even though I can't confirm that this is true or not, but allegedly Tim Burton had showed interest in making his own Grinch movie over the years. And of course, I have no idea. I mean, even if this is true, I have no idea what exactly he would have wanted for his story, or even what actor he would have selected or so. And though in my mind, if I had to recast, well, first of all, it wouldn't be a live action. It would be another stop motion project, a Tim Burton basic stop motion.
Okay. Yeah,
then,
I could see that.
And then from there, I'd want to go on the whole tangent of the Grinch being more of a grouchy old man than necessarily an over-the-top, energetic kind of guy or so. Okay. Just as like an old geezer who has just so much time on his hands that he actually he is willing to spend his whole night just taking all this stuff away from everybody.
Right, just a joyless person who kind of sneers from a distance.
Right, and that's why in my version, I wouldn't mind seeing a version of the Grinch that was voiced by Liam Neeson.
Ooh. He's got a great voice. I could see that. Very booming, commanding presence.
Right. And I think for me, that'd be my only gripe against Kate McKinnon, who's a really good comedian, but I wouldn't necessarily say her voice is booming. But then again, if you're going to cast her, you're clearly not going for the same kind of Grinch that we've seen before.
No, I was thinking more somebody who's kind of amusingly odd.
Oh,
Droll.
Yeah. And I get that. So for, going on another tangent when it comes to children's books, for question 2020, we're going to go from the Grinch to the Polar Express. And that's when I would ask, on the Polar Express, would you rather be a passenger or someone who works on the train?
I'd rather work on the train because it seems like just pure chaos and exhausting to be in that car. I first saw the movie as an adult, so I never imagined, what if he picked me up in my backyard if I got on the train. So I always looked at it like, wow, this looks like a fun adventure for kids. But yeah, I'd like to be up front checking out the scenery. I mean, when they go, I wouldn't want to be the guy who they yank on his beard, but I'd like to be up front, the conductor, checking out what's going on.
Okay, because as a kid, I actually did grow up on the book before the movie was put out. So that was actually something that, even though I was actually just a freshman in high school, but I was probably the one freshman in high school that, really wanted to see the Polar Express and, just to see how close it would get to the book. And in my mind, even as an adult, I kind of wouldn't mind being a passenger just to go through that whole experience that a 7-year-old probably would have gone through or so.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's certainly like the perfect fantasy for a kid on Christmas Eve. Hey, what if when you go to bed, maybe we'll take you up to the North Pole and meet Santa?
Yeah, right. Or just being entertained by the staff or getting whatever treats you're getting.
Hot chocolate.
Then of course, now that you mention it, question 21, hot chocolate. What dessert or what other snack would you have with that?
Christmas cookies. I mean, there's so many different Christmas cookies that that's a perfect. I don't drink a ton of hot chocolate except around Christmas time. So to me, it goes with peanut butter Christmas cookies or Carmelitas or Russian tea cakes or any sort of Christmas cookie. To me, that's like the perfect accompaniment for hot chocolate.
Well, good. I got nothing to add. That's my same answer exactly. So for speaking of the Polar Express, for 22, during that early 2000s period with Zemeckis, he was really into doing these motion capture animated movies like the Polar Express, A Christmas Carol, and even the rarely ever talked about Beowulf movie.
Yes.
Now, obviously, ever since the colossal bomb that was Mars Needs Moms from Disney, that whole company closed, and we have not seen anything like that. I mean, we've seen motion capture used as part of the filmmaking process, but it's been forever since we've seen another full motion capture movie. So that's what I would ask. How do you feel about those kinds of motion capture animated movies no longer being made?
I'm sad about it. I wouldn't say that it's always going to be used correctly, but I think taking the Christmas Carol adaptation, I thought Zemeckis was able to do something that, I talked about. I went through 100 different versions, and a lot of them were trying to be straight retelling of the story. None of them really captured Victorian London like he did.
Mm-hmm.
And he was able to do things with that technology that I think enhanced the story and gave you, when you see Victorian London in these, so many of these adaptations, you essentially get a couple old timey blocks and a lot of smoke machines to make it look very smoky, but you never really see it. And the way he was able to do that with characters, and I thought it was cool how in Polar Express, Tom Hanks is playing different parts and Jim Carrey was playing different parts in A Christmas Carol. I liked it. I think it can certainly fail. And, you got to be afraid to strike out when you're going for a home run kind of thing. But I think you can really master that for animated kids movies, or just, like where you're trying to capture a period piece, or if you're trying to create a universe like a North Pole, the way he was able to do that, you can't really do that with to my knowledge of the regular filmmaking methods they use. CGI doesn't quite work. I think there's a specific vibe that these movies give off that I really enjoy.
Yeah, and I get that too, because I know Zemeckis at one point had talked about how he'd always wanted to complete his Christmas trilogy with his last one, which would have been the Nutcracker, but I don't know how far he got along with that before that whole plug was pulled. And plus, had Mars Needs Moms not failed, then he would have gone through with making what would have been his next Image Movers movie, Yellow Submarine.
Interesting.
Which I will admit, in my casual eye, having seen that once or twice, I'm wondering, now how do you pull off a hyper-realistic version of a Yellow Submarine?
Right, but I again, those two movies, Polar Express and A Christmas Carol, tell me that he could have pulled off something pretty impressive with it. I really thought he succeeded with what he was attempting to do for those.
Right. Because the only other one that I remember that honestly I do like was when he and Spielberg produced that other stop or motion capture movie, Monster House. Have you ever seen that one?
Yes. Where it's like they go, the house is like swallowing people up across the street or something.
That's actually become kind of a Halloween canon movie for me these days.
Yeah.
Which, now speaking of animation, for 23, given that we've seen, a ton of different styles of animation, hand-drawn, motion capture, stop motion, CG, which animation style to you more or less says Christmas the most?
To me, without question, it's the I forget what the Rankin Bass specifically called it, but the stop motion style of Rankin Bass. But they call it Animagic. That was it. But I think that Jon Favreau, when he's trying to create that timeless Christmas feel for Elf, that's what he incorporated into the North Pole, and I think it worked so well. And to me, that was my childhood with a lot of those specials, and that is Christmas. But I will say, was it 2 years ago, Klaus?
Klaus from.
That's one of the Netflix movie. That was one of the most beautiful movies. That's the hand-drawn animation. I thought that was beautiful the way it looked.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm talking about what puts me in the Christmas vibe and what's the classic, to me, it's stop motion.
Yeah, and I get that too, especially when it comes to even like just the TV specials alone, even though I didn't grow up on the Rankin Bass stuff, because a lot of other different like commercials have been produced in stop motion, and even SNL had done their own stop motion parodies of all that.
Yes.
That too still screams Christmas to me. And even when I look at something like Polar Express, even though I think it's a good movie, I wonder like 50 years from now, how is this CG going to look? To those kinds of modern eyes.
Right.
And yet whenever I see Elf and that whole stop motion process, and there's just that whole stop motion look, I'm wondering, I don't know if this is going to ever feel dated. It might seem a little older, but I don't see this, I don't see somebody looking at this going, this looks way too old fashioned for me.
Right. It looks it looks like it's a certain feel. It's not trying to be realistic looking. It's trying to be classic Christmas looking.
Yeah, and that's why I really appreciate that.
Right.
Now, 24, going on that same stop motion vibe. What is your favorite Rankin Bass special?
So this is going to be the loop here that I throw you for. I do enjoy Santa Claus is Coming to Town with Fred Astaire and telling the story of why Santa uses stockings and reindeer and all that. However, my favorite Rankin Bass special has to do with the fact that I had a record when I was a kid of 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, which was not stop motion. It was animated with mice. It was with the mice and Joel Grey and I forget who else, but it was the telling of the story of 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, where the mice living in this guy's house also kind of were going through their own Christmas sub story as the family going through it. And then the culmination of the special is the telling of the famous poem. But to me, it's like when you're a kid and I had a record, I knew all the words to it. So even though it only appeared on TV once a year, I listened to it 70 times a year. You know, when I'm in first grade after school, I pop it on. I was listening to it. So I knew that special inside and out. So that's actually my favorite one. And I don't know anybody who that's their favorite Rankin Bass special.
Yeah, because I'll probably get around to that one at some point on my podcast. Because I've already decided that when I do cover the other Rankin Bass stuff, it's going to be in chronological order of when it was released. So whenever I do get around to the next Rankin Bass property, it's going to be The Little Drummer Boy, which I haven't watched yet, but I'll be curious to see what I find on that one.
Yeah, and there's the Little Drummer Boy 2. If you're going that deep, if you keep going into number 21 and 22 of Rankin Bass, there's some that are get pretty grim, but yeah, some of them are. I mean, Frosty, that's not stop motion, So this was of the style of Frosty. The kids have the same ears and teeth and same kind of look as the Frosty kids. And it was the Night Before Christmas. But my favorite stop motion is Santa Claus is Coming to Town with Fred Astaire.
Right, and I'm actually excited to look at that one because even though I haven't seen that one, I've seen clips of it, and it at least looks charming enough that I'm certainly drawn in to want to watch it. Because I mean, even though when I was a kid I thought it looked old fashioned, I wouldn't necessarily say that I looked at it and thought, I really don't want to watch this or so.
Right.
But yeah, I am actually excited to look at the other Rankin Bass stuff when I do get around to that, because as I've said, once I saw the Rudolph, I really came to really appreciate the whole special once I finished it. Yeah,
I think you'll certainly not all of them. Some of them are rough. I mean, Rudolph and Frosty's Christmas in July. I mean, there's some terrible ones, but they're pretty cool, and there's a definite charm to a handful of them.
Oh yeah. Now, speaking of the Rankin Bass stuff, one of the set of characters I do know are the Miser Brothers, especially with that famous Miser Brothers song. And over the years, people have come up with their own covers of the Miser Brothers song, and people have even done their own casting. So for 25, in a live action Miser Brothers movie, who would you cast as Heatmiser and Snowmizer?
Well, it's pretty weird. I used to work with a guy who looked exactly like the Snowmizer, except he was not a entertaining guy, so I wouldn't cast him. If we're doing dream casting that unrealistic, I think my dream casting would be like Bill Murray and Billy Bob Thornton playing these cantankerous but can be very funny versions of them. Or I would say you just go for some great character actors like Peter Stormare, Scoot McNairy. Get two guys like that and just have them play it weird.
Yeah, and I get that. Because having even though I have not seen The Year Without Santa Claus, I've certainly seen almost a good chunk of the Miser Brothers song, and I even seen the live action interpretation of that song.
Yeah.
Which a lot of people do not care for, especially.
Yeah, I'm not a fan. I love the Miser Brothers part of The Year Without a Santa Claus. I think that's such a cool part in that song, and they're dancing around and stuff. But yeah, I have not cared for the separate special or the live song.
Right, yeah, and in my mind, because I was trying to do my own little like dream casting of the Miser brothers, and in my mind, I probably would have gone with the whole character actors that could sing pretty well.
Right.
So in my mind,
I didn't pick anybody I knew. I didn't even think about them singing.
Yeah, and that's why I would have said that for Heatmiser, I probably would have cast Josh Gad in that part.
Okay.
And then because I'm obviously going for younger versions of the Miser brothers.
Yeah.
And then for Snowmizer, Neil Patrick Harris.
Well, yeah, the ultimate song and dance, man.
Right, and I just feel like that at least was with those two performing, I'd at least get a very entertaining song and dance number with the Miser brothers.
Sure.
But at least depending on which route they go. So now going on the same stop motion route, now we're moving away from Rankin Bass to Tim Burton. So for 26, The Nightmare Before Christmas. Do you count that as a Christmas movie?
No. I see it listed in all the Christmas movies when they play the Christmas marathons that it's included. And I think it's just because it's in the title, Christmas. To me, that's a Halloween movie that is bringing a famous Christmas character along for the ride. But to me, it gives, I like it. But it gives off a very Halloween spooky vibe to me. And
okay.
So I like the movie. It's not a criticism of the movie, but I don't see it as a Christmas movie.
Because this is interesting because I have the complete opposite opinion that you do have. Because I only see it as a Christmas movie. I actually do not see this as a Halloween movie in any light in my book, which for the longest time I couldn't figure out why. But for me, here's what I came up with. Yes, we do have a lot of the Halloween characters as the focus. And the whole thing is mostly set in Halloween Town. We only go to Christmas Town for a few scenes, and we only go to the real world once. But with all those Halloween characters and Jack Skellington, what is the story about? Is it really about them trying to do the next big Halloween thing? No, it's all about their discovery of Christmas and trying to get a good grasp on what the holiday is, even if Jack was really the only one who kind of figured out what it was early on, if the other citizens of Halloween Town couldn't figure it out.
Okay, fair enough. I just get it. I think for me, it's just a general vibe. I get a spooky vibe from it, so I think of it at Halloween time.
Right, and plus, being that I'm in Southern California, every year when I go to Disneyland around the holidays, I always see the Haunted Mansion Holiday, which is all decked out with the Nightmare Before Christmas characters.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and then even though you do get your fair share of jack-o'-lanterns and other Halloween stuff, it's definitely a Christmas ride in my book. Pure and simple. Even though they do premiere the ride in like mid-September or so.
Right, but that's just, everything kicks off early.
Right, and of course, before I actually picked doing Krampus, I considered doing The Night Before Christmas as my Halloween special. But then I realized, but I just did the Rudolph special. I don't want to do two stop motion specials in the same fact. Otherwise, I'd just be repeating more of the same thing.
Well, then maybe you just wait till next October and you can do it because it's a Halloween movie.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So, but yeah, speaking of which, on Tim Burton's, or the whole Tim Burton tangent for 27, okay. If Tim Burton could handle another Christmas story, because he's already done 3 of them. He's already done Edward Scissorhands, Batman Returns, and even though he didn't direct The Nightmare Before Christmas, that still has his fingerprints all over it. Would you like to see Tim Burton do another original Christmas story or another adaptation?
I think I'd like to see. You made a good point, I think, about your idea of an update of the Grinch, maybe seeing his kind of style to it. And maybe I'd like to see what he would do with fleshing out a short special into a full-length thing. Have him do Frosty or have him do Rudolph. I know Rudolph was a longer special than the Grinch, but have him take something that has a kind of simple story and then give it the Tim Burton animated spin to it. I think that would be kind of cool.
Right. Yeah. And I could see that. I still wouldn't mind seeing that in this day and age, even though Tim Burton has not had a big hit movie in a little while or so, because I think the last one he did was the live action Dumbo movie.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Which,
he kind of started just being like a Johnny Depp partnership for a while, right? There was a lot of those.
Yeah, but it was Dark Shadows that I think really started to seem like more of the same or so.
Yeah,
and hence he started trying some stuff outside of his comfort zone. And even though, at least in my book, the last true Tim Burton movie we had was his own stop motion remake of Frankenweenie.
Yes. Well, that was. Well, then you're if you're not including the stuff after that, he's been on quite a dry spell. But
well, yeah, because I really do not count the other stuff because a lot of it's just a little too un-Tim Burton like or so. I mean, even though I will give Dumbo credit that even though I didn't think that movie was that good, that was actually one of the few live action Disney remakes that I almost liked.
I'm with you. I think that because I saw it with my son when that came out in the theaters, and I liked that he was going for something, and it wasn't a bland attempt at a shot for shot remake with just not cartoon characters.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't totally hit for me. But I like that there's still something weird in him that can. I believe that if he wanted to jump into a stop motion Christmas movie, I think he could nail it.
Yeah, and this is why, at least in my book, if Tim Burton were to do a Christmas story, I'd rather that he just do his own thing and come up with his own story.
Sure.
But just because I've always seen him more as an illustrator first that comes up with the story to go with it.
Okay. Yeah, no, fair. I'd like to see where his mind could take something that we already. I like his original mind, but I think it'd be kind of cool to see if he could break how we think of Frosty or something like that.
True. Now, speaking of Tim Burton, for 28, Batman Returns. Do you count that as a Christmas movie?
Absolutely. To me, if Christmas was in the title, if this was the Batman Christmas story or something, I don't think people would be like, well, that's not a Christmas movie. If it had Christmas in the title, it would just be widely assumed that's a Christmas movie because it all takes place at Christmas time. The big tree, Rockefeller Center type tree in Gotham. He and Catwoman kiss under the mistletoe. There's decorations everywhere. It's a Christmas action superhero movie. It's Christmas. To me, it's definitely a Christmas movie.
Yep, me too. I've got nothing to add to that other than I just think that even the way it ends with the snow slowly falling and he's here, Alfred, wishing Bruce Wayne a Merry Christmas.
Yes.
Just itself just seems Christmassy, even though it's just a small, subtle thing. That moment to me just at least showed Alfred's, willingness to at least try to spark some Christmas joy within Bruce Wayne.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. Now for 29, now that we've seen heroes like Batman, Iron Man, Shazam, and of course, upcoming Hawkeye, what other superhero would you like to see get their own holiday special?
So I'm not super well versed in the superhero genre. So, going way down She-Hulk, and I'm sort of aware of the characters, but I don't really know so many backstories outside of Spider-Man, Batman, the main most popular ones. So I was thinking I could see a fun Pixar adventure with the Incredibles, a Christmas movie. So those superheroes, at least they're a little fresher in my mind because I've watched those movies with my kids a bunch of times, and I could see them doing something cool with them.
Yeah, because I like those Incredible movies, even though we've only gotten 2 of them over the years. And like a lot of people, I've always been curious about their further adventures, especially on what they would have done with the family around the holidays. And I'm kind of hoping that maybe with Hawkeye, we might be getting at least an idea of what we could have seen.
That's a series, or is that going to be just a one-off movie?
That's the upcoming miniseries that's on.
It's a miniseries, yeah. I knew it was coming to Disney Plus. I just didn't know if it was a one-off movie or if it was going to be some sort of limited series.
Right, yeah, and I'm curious about that. And that's why I would have said too that if I were to cast any other like heroes I'd want to see with their own holiday special, I kind of want to see what Spider-Man would do around that circumstance, especially around New York City.
Right. I live across the river from New York City. So yeah, that when I think of Christmas time, I think of New York City.
Right. Yeah. And of course, I don't know what I would do for that. I've never been brave enough to try to write my own Spider-Man fanfic because I will say that whenever I'm not doing any of my podcasts or other stuff, I also write fan fiction. And for Halloween, I even wrote my own crossover of the Ghostbusters and Nightmare on Elm Street.
Oh, cool.
Which I still have yet to publish. I am going to make an announcement on my podcast when that's going to be available to read because that's like a 10-chapter story that I've written.
Oh, that's fun.
So, yeah. And then, of course, if that goes off well, I'm even working on a sequel where Krueger then ends up in the world of Spawn and that whole thing.
Wow. Yeah, cool. Well, hopefully it gives you reason to continue.
Right. But I think this is why most people, like watching their Cape Crusaders, especially amongst the Christmas environment, just because it just seems so jarring that nothing bad could happen around Christmas.
Right. Yeah. There's an additional element of danger that's going on while Christmas is happening.
Now, speaking of superheroes, for question 30, would you count Santa Claus as a superhero?
I mean, given what he's capable of, I think you would have to. He's moving at a rate that nobody can comprehend. He's able to bring joy to people and overcome things that normal people couldn't. They couldn't handle the elements and getting everywhere and overcoming all the different things. So yeah, I'd say he is. And even though I wasn't the biggest fan of the movies, the Netflix movies, the Christmas Chronicles, I like that they were attempting to make Santa kind of a badass, and I could see that he doesn't usually get viewed as such, but he is. He's got superhuman abilities. He's a superhero.
Yeah, I could see that too. And of course, I do intend on covering both the Christmas Chronicle movies at some point because for Kurt Russell, this was actually his second chance to play Santa. Because when I was doing my research for the Santa Claus, apparently Kurt Russell was one of the actors either considered or offered the role of Scott Calvin, but either he wasn't offered it or said no. Okay.
My sons were way into the Christmas Chronicles. I didn't dislike it. It's just it didn't register as much for me.
Right. Yeah. And though I do appreciate the second one for trying to include Belschnickel within the whole series.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sort of another darker side of Christmas we don't see that often.
Right.
So now speaking of Santa Clauses, let's talk about Miracle on 34th Street. Let's go with the Edmund Gwynn one. For 31, is Kris Kringle the real Santa?
Absolutely. Absolutely, without question. That's the whole. To me, that he proves it time and time again. He's the real guy, and he, for some reason, he decides in late December. He's going to focus on one specific daughter and mother-daughter combo, and he's going to fill them with spirit. But I always believed he was the real deal.
Yeah, I thought that way too for both the Edmund Gwynn and the Richard Attenborough versions. I got both the vibe from both movies, and it even almost made me it kind of made me think about how, in a weird way, those stories are almost like feature length, like holiday Twilight Zone episodes.
Yes, they kind of are.
Yeah,
what?
Even though we already had a holiday Twilight Zone episode, which I will say I do like the Art Carney Santa from that one too. But I'm glad we're both in agreement that Kris is the real Santa.
Yes.
So for 32, let's say they had to do another remake of Miracle on 34th Street. Who do we cast as Kris?
I don't know if it would take you too much out of the scene, but I kind of think it would be cool to have Sam Elliott. Have him be an old bearded Sam Elliott with that booming voice if he was Santa Claus. I don't know. It would be weird, but I think it would be kind of fun, kind of charming.
Okay, I could see that in a funny way. I mean, I would be curious to see just how many kids would want to sit on his lap to see this like almost intimidating Santa.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's a little too. Maybe how about Tom Selleck, an old Tom Selleck? Maybe give him a big beard. He's got a little bit of a friendlier voice, not as intimidating, but a big voice.
Yeah, I could see that too. Because in my mind, I was trying to think about, like, let's say someone were to press me to do a Miracle on 34th Street. I mean, the first I'd probably do is probably try to turn down the job. But let's say, you got to make this movie, Robert. Who do you cast as Kris Kringle? Well, I was trying to think about just who could I see someone that, at least around kids, would at least could become a comforting figure. Just someone that, at least got the idea that everything was going to be okay with you or so. And I thought, in my mind, I probably would try to go for Robert Redford as Chris.
Oh, wow.
I know he's really up there as an actor, and I don't even know if he'd do it or so, but you never know. Yeah.
I mean, he's a great actor, so you can't argue with that. And he's old.
Right. Yeah. But otherwise, my ultimatum would be, don't make the movie. I want to see some original Christmas stuff.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, and in a way, I have to still appreciate John Hughes for being gutsy enough to, flat out say he wanted to do his own retelling of Miracle on 34th Street.
Yes, I mean, it takes, because it was already probably, I don't know, 45 years old when he decided to remake it, and it was established. Unlike It's a Wonderful Life that like had a second life in the 70s. Miracle on 34th Street, I think, was always a big deal and always a standard Christmas movie. So he was tackling a giant.
Right. And I'm actually excited to get to that episode at some point because I know that having read the autobiography that Mara Wilson put out, she was the actress from Miracle. Sure. And she talked about how when she originally auditioned for the role, John Hughes was actually his original idea was to rewrite the Natalie Wood role into a boy and do a different take. But apparently when they were auditioning all these girls, including Mara Wilson, they decided to revert it back to a girl.
I mean, she was such a great child actor, like Matilda, and she was excellent in those roles. So I can see why she was as famous as she was. Yeah. And this is why I'd also would want to tackle into the exactly, because even though the first Miracle on 34th Street is almost like a giant ad for Macy's, I would have wondered that given all the financial trouble that Macy went through in the 90s, and of course going through a lot of trouble now, why would they not want their name on the remake? It's a good question. I mean, I still can't figure out why M&M's didn't allow E.T. to use their product when Steven Spielberg was already a known commodity by then of making monster hits. Well, somebody from Mars was fired that day. Absolutely. Though now going back on the tangent of Santa, now that that we talked about a couple different versions of Santa and talked about the best of the best, now it's time to get into the trashiness of Christmas. So for 33, given how you've done all your research, what is your least favorite or worst portrayal of Santa Claus? So I think you're really not going to like this one. There have been, I mean, the ice cream bunny one, like that Santa is terrible. There are some really bad ones, but the one that bothers me the most is actually in the Santa Claus 3. I think Tim Allen is just collecting a paycheck, and I just don't see a lot of. I'm not seeing the same spirit put into that one, and so I know you've talked about enjoying that franchise, but to me, in the Santa Claus 3, Tim Allen, I was watching a guy like give minimal effort is what I viewed it as. Well, I will say, I never said I like the franchise. I like the first and even partially like the second movie. I never said I like the third movie. Right. And I do kind of agree that he is just kind of phoning in on that performance. I think Martin Short tries his best in that movie. I love Martin Short, but it's not enough to rescue that movie. Yeah. But even then, I never even thought that the script for
Santa Claus 3 was even that good to begin with,
Right.
given how they really tried to work in a lot of elements that just didn't pay off. And without a good script, Tim Allen really probably didn't even know how to work with that material, and thus just didn't deliver one of his better ones.
The whole thing felt like a cash grab. So that was the one that bothered me the most. But there are certainly some awful Santas.
And that's why at one point, one of the things I'm actually working on with one of the other podcasters, even though we'll make an announcement about this later on, we're working on a little side alternate project that explores our own interpretation of what if the Santa Claus 3 was actually a good movie.
That's some premise.
Yeah, and even though the only thing we've come up with so far would have been that his son Charlie would have now reigned in the duty of Santa Claus or so.
Oh, yeah.
And how, at least with that kind of dynamic, I can now, how in the first Santa Claus, the Charlie was the excitable kid and Scott was the reluctant guy. Well, now at least in this version, the roles will be reversed so that, Scott Calvin's now the excitable one and Charlie's the one who's much more reluctant.
Yeah. I mean, there just has to be a lot of reworking to that story.
Right. And unfortunately, the only way you can do that is to almost throw out the script and start from scratch. And even though I will tell you, though, that my least favorite portrayal of Santa Claus actually comes from another Disney movie. Do you remember a 1980s Disney movie called One Magic Christmas?
Oh yeah. That was brutal, that movie. That's one of the most brutal movies ever.
Oh, yeah, because not only was that movie just grim, really, really grim. I just
Not sure what the purpose of that movie was.
Well, I understand that they're trying to have the mom go through her whole Christmas Carol thing, but I don't know. Going through that whole movie, it almost feels like walking out of someone's depression or so. And even once we get to the North Pole and see Santa, to me, I just find it really jarring. I don't know how kids would feel about this, but I find the image of a very frail Santa kind of disheartening.
Yeah, it was a pretty pathetic Santa.
Right. And even if it was been a better actor, with the way he was portrayed, he almost seemed too old to really do the job. And I thought, I don't want to picture Santa as too sad and frail to go do his work.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. He was the ailing Santa.
Yeah. And that's, I'm not looking forward to that episode, although I know I'm going to have to cover that one at some point.
I really would. I'd be interested in listening to it because I want to know the motivations behind all of the decisions for that thing.
Yeah, all I know so far is that it was almost a Canadian produced movie that Disney picked up.
It was grim.
Yeah, though let's do something a little bit more upbeat for 34. For Santa and the Ice Cream Bunny, just what are the rabbit's powers and why doesn't he have the ice cream?
I honestly think this was early 70s, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's so many. The question that popped up, because I watched it for the first time yesterday, and I couldn't believe why was Huckleberry Finn in it? Well, there was no ice cream, and ice cream is in the title. Why did Santa, he had run aground in his sleigh? Why didn't he ever try to get out and just move it around? He barely did anything. He just kept looking around in his sleigh. There were no toys, but no explanation about what was going on. Just that the reindeer got spooked and took off. It felt like they found they went into an opium den and gave a bunch of guys a piece of paper and they're like, come up with something here. And that's what they got with the script. They're playing Old Man River on kazoos, and it's a Christmas movie. There's a pig, Jack and the Beanstalk. It was the craziest thing I've ever seen, and I could not figure out what was going on.
Yeah, because the first time I even heard about it, I didn't even think it was real up until I saw a YouTube thing of it. Because what's weird is that you can't even find a full version of it on YouTube. You actually have to pay for it in order to rent it, which. I pity the person that actually had to pay money for it.
It's on Tubi now. That's what I caught it on yesterday. Yeah. And
all right.
It was, oh my God. I'd never seen anything like it. Even the bunny mascot, there was something wrong with one of the eyes. It's the weirdest thing I've ever seen.
Right. And I guess, and even though I got to confirm this with my research once I find more information, but I think a lot of the props, especially the Santa outfit, the bunny outfit, the sleigh, the fire engine he rides on, apparently, I think that a lot of it were just used props from that Pirates World theme park where the whole thing was shot nearby.
It clearly was a bunch of stuff laying around and a bunch of kids standing around, and they're like, let's make a movie.
Yeah, and of course, I even looked into to see if this Pirates Park was still open, and of course, it's not. Disney World took it out, and now it's standing there now. It's just a whole bunch of condominiums.
Yeah,
but yeah, that's something I wouldn't mind seeing remade. Like, let's say you get like an Edgar Wright who'd want to take the story and be like, I'm going to take the story and make it great.
Okay, but I mean, I don't know what he's working with. Where it's still all. What would he do with Huckleberry Finn? What does he have to do with Santa? What is it's crazy. It doesn't make any sense in any way. Every scene, and then just like they'd zoom in on a kid that clearly didn't know he was in the movie.
Well, that's when I probably would quote The Simpsons in this one episode where a fan had asked Xena a question and she said, "Oh, whenever you see something like that, a wizard did it." Yeah, but in episode 4 or 5, wizard. Okay. But yeah, now speaking of other bad Christmas movies, for 35, after Santa Claus had, well, quote unquote, successfully conquered the Martians, does this mean he now has to do his gift giving around the galaxy, around the universe?
You know, after appearing in that movie, I think Santa needs to keep a low profile. So I'm guessing he goes nowhere. He doesn't leave the home for a few years.
Well, after all, this was a Santa who wasn't afraid to be interviewed for a news channel.
Yeah.
Then I'd pretty much be on the same boat because if you appeared on TV, then just got captured by these cheap looking Martians, then
yeah, the whole magic of Christmas is just shattered by that movie.
Oh yeah. Though for 36, after conquering Mars, what should Santa Claus conquer next?
Well, this is my adult wish list for Santa. I would like him to conquer people who loudly sigh in waiting rooms or in line at the store. Like they're not helping. They're just adding tension to the room. They're not doing anything productive. That's what I want Santa to conquer.
All right. I like that answer. I mean, mine's a little more elaborate, though. Though I do like the idea of Santa spreading his joy to the adult world.
Right.
But at least in my book, I've always wanted to see Santa conquer Wall Street.
Oh.
Like if his joy and magic spread amongst those other stressed out looking stockbrokers and traders, just how different the whole trading floor would be.
Change their motivations, change the goodwill spirit in them, sure.
Yeah, just to cover like that side of greed or so. Like, who knows? Maybe that could be another Wall Street 3, Gordon Gekko meets Santa.
There you go.
So here's another fun question. For 37, for a remake of Santa Claus Conquers the Martians, who should direct it? They'd have the ability to tell their own version of it, but who would you like to see direct a modern day remake of Santa Conquers the Martians?
So this guy is definitely not he's not a flawless director, but I could see if you wanted to take it in a kind of a weird direction. How about the guy who made the movie District 9? Was that Blomkamp?
Yeah, Neil Blomkamp. Yeah.
If he could do some sort of gritty, weird alien version, maybe he could create something weird out of it.
Okay. Because I get what you mean by the whole weirdness aspect, because if there was anything I remember from Santa Claus Conquers the Martians is the weirdness factor of, I mean, even though it was cheap, it was still weird and in an intriguing way that at least made me want to at least see where things went from this point.
Right.
So if I was going to focus on the weirdness, the only guy that I'd want to see take on this project would be James Gunn.
Oh, okay. So he would do he could do something big with it.
Right, considering that when he redid that Suicide Squad movie just this year, and even though it was full of weird characters like Ratcatcher and Polka Dot Man, I was actually engaged the entire time.
No, it was big and fun, but yeah, it was he went big and it worked.
Yeah, and plus, along with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, he's also producing a Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special for Disney Plus next year.
Oh, wow.
And that's what I'm wondering. Do they celebrate Christmas in space, or are they going to pull their own Life Day situation?
Yeah, well, I think they're going to have to steer clear of Life Day because that didn't work.
Yeah, well, I will give Jon Favreau credit. In the very first episode of The Mandalorian, they referenced Life Day. So,
oh man, I missed that. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was the character that, or the first guy that the Mandalorian captures, and he says something like, "I hope I make it home in time for Life Day." And
that's great. I remember that first character. I just don't remember him saying that.
Yeah, so I guess it is in the continuity, but again, this is why I'm always curious by someone's weird interpretation of Christmas.
Sure.
And with James Gunn, I know that if he were in charge with Santa Claus Conquers the Martians, it would be unapologetically weird.
And that's fine. But yeah, he would have to do a lot of work on that one.
Oh, yeah. Although, speaking of bad Christmas movies for 38, what's a bad Christmas movie you wouldn't mind seeing remade, a movie that's where its problems are fixed? Like maybe it had a good idea, but it was just given to the wrong person or just had the wrong script.
So I think the idea of celebrating Christmas in different households because of divorced parents is something that could be done well, but Four Christmases got terrible reviews, but it's a movie that's perfectly set up for good vignettes because you can have four different things happening because it's two sets of divorced parents. And I think that premise of dysfunctional family Christmases can be done in different ways. And I could see in the right hands, you could get right casting, right hands, you can do things and capture what the ref has or what certain the Griswolds have. There are different types of dysfunctional Christmases that could be fun. And you have the opportunity to do four of those vignettes for a movie that, it didn't hit the way they were intending to, but I could see that premise working.
Yeah, I was actually having this conversation with one of the other holiday podcasters on how Four Christmases has a good idea for a Christmas movie, but with the way it was written, it just wasn't going to work. Because first of all, I will tell you, being in California on Christmas, there is no way they would have gone to all four of those families.
They were covering a lot of different. You could just see the landscape was wildly different for where they were going. It's like that's a lot of ground to cover.
Oh, yeah, because even though I got families spread out all over Southern California, even if I had to, at the most, I could probably get to two families in one day. If, let's say I had to drive to San Diego for something, only to drive back up to either Riverside or LA if it's really bad. And at the most, they're getting 30 minutes from me. And you just can't do that. You can't do a one-day situation. Which is why I thought that for a remake, why not just have it so you're visiting two sets on Christmas Eve? Maybe one of those nights they're staying over, and then on Christmas the next day, then they go to the other two sets.
Fair, yeah, they could do it, but I'm just saying it's set up for four vignettes of funny, interesting things going on. It's just right. You gotta nail those vignettes.
Yeah, and to the writer's credit, they clearly had good ideas for different setups for this kind of comedy.
I like parts of that movie. I'm not saying that I dislike the whole thing, but the likability of the characters and what were you pulling for in certain. But there were some funny parts that made me laugh. It's just overall, I think it whiffed on what it was ultimately trying to accomplish.
Oh yeah, man. Yeah, that's something I wouldn't mind seeing a remake of. The only other Christmas movie, at least in my book, I wouldn't mind seeing a remake of, which maybe it's because I haven't really seen a movie about Christmas lighting, but I always wanted to see a much funnier and much better remake of Deck the Halls. Okay.
Again, that movie, when I saw what they were going to, the trailer or the actors, I had high hopes for it. And I was like, oh, this didn't work the way I had hoped.
Right, because initially from the trailers and the poster, I thought it was going to be about two different guys who went out for their different lighting styles and we're going to both like try to outdo each other. But in the end, it was only one guy that was outdoing the other, really for no other reason other than even I understood that he wanted to be seen from space, but I thought, so why do you have to bully Matthew Broderick the entire time, though?
Yeah, I thought it was going to be an arms race, a competitive advantage. There was some contest between the two of them and it was just going to be a kind of a one-upsmanship kind of movie, which, could take elements of Grumpy Old Men, having like a rivalry that funny things could happen, but instead it just became like a mean-spirited, weird, obsessive situation.
Right, because even last Christmas when I was out with family, and at one point that movie was playing on for the kids on one channel. As soon as the commercial hit, they asked, "Robert, can we change the channel?" I'm like, "Yes, please." And then I think we popped on some other Nickelodeon show. But if you couldn't even hook in the kids, then you've already got an issue.
And there's great actors in that movie,
right? But I can also tell that the movie was just. It was, to me, it was like one of those like one draft movies where it was written on the fly, where they thought that all the jokes would hit, and like, I understand kids. Like you get that one kid who's like, I've reached master mode on Halo. I don't know what else to do. And I'm like, okay, that doesn't make you special, kid. That makes you like every other 9-year-old. But yeah, that's a movie that it would need like a total reset, but I could see that being remade as a much better movie with the right writing team.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and though, speaking of Christmas remakes, for 39, what's a Christmas movie or TV special that should never be remade?
I think people do get a little too precious with their remakes. I've heard people when the Coen brothers did True Grit, I remember people saying, "Oh, the John Wayne version was perfect," and I totally disagree. I don't think it was perfect, and I think the Coen brothers did a great job with the remake. But in general, the movie that I just don't see the need for a remake that was remade is Miracle on 34th Street. So
okay,
I've always liked John Hughes movies, and I think he did a good job with that. But I also think it's not a wildly different retelling. I know he was trying to put a spin, and maybe if it was a boy, it would have been a different spin. But I just thought it was another nice version that didn't seem very different from the original.
Okay.
So I don't dislike the movie, and if I had only seen the 1994 version, I think I would like that movie just as a standalone movie. But when we were talking about maybe remaking that earlier, I was thinking that just doesn't need to be remade. That the premise is very simple with the mother-daughter, Santa, the guy who's kind of getting to know the mother. It kind of all works.
Right, yeah, man, I get that. Because it's funny you mentioned a movie that's already been remade, because the movie I selected has technically already been remade several times, and to me, that's Home Alone.
Right.
Because to be fair, the sequel, at least the other sequels have more or less just been the same thing, and then I know there's the upcoming reboot movie that's coming on Disney Plus.
Yeah, that looks like the same thing.
Yeah, it looks like the same thing. And even I'm not going to act like the Home Alone is a masterpiece. It's a family film, but it's a beautifully looking family film, along with one of John Williams' best scores.
Yeah, it holds up just fine. Right now.
And that's what I'm wondering. Is there really much you can do to really improve on this concept?
Right. I think you can do a movie that's very old timey that you could totally adapt to modern times, but a kid using what's at his house to his disposal and burglars and it already had, like you said, an amazing score. And I think a 6-year-old watcher or 8-year-old watching that movie today doesn't feel like it's a dated movie. It has a classic, the whole color aspect that you talked about, that, each scene has to have these colors. Like it looks beautiful. There's nothing dated feeling about it, even though I mean, it's 30 years old.
Yeah.
It just there doesn't seem to be a need. I get they're making something new. They're making something because it's something they can launch on Disney Plus, but
yeah, and of course I'm just wondering that for at least a modern day version of Home Alone, how they're going to work around the whole tech issue, because to me there just seems to be too many modern day conveniences that would truly prevent a kid from being home alone. Because I mean, I've seen that like comic, like this like 5-second comic of a kid who wakes up, texts his parents, "Hey, where'd you guys go? Wait there, we'll be home," and then the movie's over.
Yeah, I was with a family and just on Sunday, and the kid got separated for 15 seconds, and he called his mom on the phone, and everybody was reunited 15 seconds later.
Right, but of course in 1990 that's different because we don't have. I mean, even though there were cell phones, but yeah, no 8-year-old's going to have a cell phone at that point, and thus the stakes were much more raised, considering that they worked in that the phone lines were out, and thus they really had no way to even get any contact. So, yeah, at least the script worked in that whole tense factor on just why the mom would be, that agitated that she wasn't getting home, or the fact that Kevin, because he made his wish at that age, he really truly thought that his wish came true, and it was just some supernatural force that took his parents.
Yeah.
And of course, for a modern day remake, I just don't see them, really improving on the concept. I mean, even though I like some of the talent that's involved with the newer movie, I mean, best case scenario, it's a passable family film, but I just don't see it outdoing the original, especially when you don't have John Williams doing your score.
Yeah, I think to me, it's like Miracle on 34th Street. I think the remake could be perfectly good. Mm-hmm. And it seems like it's got a good cast. I'm not saying the new one's going to be bad, but it's going to feel like they're just kind of making what they already have.
Right. Yeah. And to me, it just seems, like you said, just more of a cash grab for Disney. And even Macaulay Culkin, from who I do understand, is actually not in the movie as originally planned or so.
No,
because I think at one point they were trying to talk about this making somewhat of a continuation, but I don't know if that got thrown out during the pre-production stage. But it is fun to see Macaulay Culkin occasionally kind of like jokingly reprise his role. Like
in the commercial for Amazon or something.
Right. And then like a year before that, he filmed an internet video with a guy named the Angry Video Game Nerd, where he played a bunch of Home Alone games with him.
Yeah.
And but yeah, that's why I mean, even though some people might wonder why I wouldn't say something like It's a Wonderful Life, which, even though that's a great movie too, part of me actually wouldn't mind seeing a much more modern interpretation of that or so, if given to the like absolute right, like maybe even if Steven Spielberg was given that property or so.
Right. Yeah. If the premise, if you could work new aspects to somebody just trying to see what their life would be like if they were never born, what life would be like and what value they bring, you could do stuff with that.
Right. And that's why I'm not even against the idea of continuously seeing more and more remakes of A Christmas Carol, because there are a variety of angles you can go at it.
Yes, absolutely.
In fact, one of my favorite Christmas audiobooks that I listen to every year is a story called Jacob Marley, which actually goes into the backstory of the character Jacob Marley, how he became
the evil mentor. Yeah.
Yeah. And then of course, showing his character accepting his death and how in the afterlife he made his deal with the other spirits to come and visit Scrooge, and just how just maybe Jacob himself might get a second chance at a redemption in the afterlife.
Okay, that could be cool.
And I thought that this too I could see as a entertaining movie with the right guy helming it.
Sure.
But that's just the thing. Some people are precious with the remake, some are okay with it. Yeah, to me, it's a case-by-case basis.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, we're coming to the end of our infamous Christmas survey, and with the last one, 40, here's my other question. What are 2 Christmas movies you'd like to see a crossover of?
Well, let's stick with one of the ones we just mentioned, Home Alone. What if you took Home Alone and Bad Santa and you have a situation where there's burglars. You know how Thurman Merman in Bad Santa, he's kind of home alone, but because his dad's in jail, and he's with a grandmother who's out of it. What if you had a situation where you have a guy trying to take advantage of that situation, and at the same time you have burglars trying to rob the kid and maybe harm the kid, and you factor in how Willie has grown to like the kid and now wants to thwart, or maybe there's some sort of rivalry between the burglars that tackle different aspects of robbing people or places, and have those things.
Okay, I could see that. I could see that being a very entertaining story, and plus, I'm glad that you also picked a old and at least an older movie and a newer movie, because I picked something similar, which is a crossover between Christmas Vacation and Krampus.
The Griswolds be systematically destroyed.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, get the whole family in there, like their great uncle and great aunt. They're all part of it too.
Yeah,
and
Uncle Lewis, everybody.
Just to get their reactions on the various monsters and Krampus himself. Or what if it was Aunt Bethany that was the one reciting the tale of Krampus in her own offbeat way?
After she does the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yeah, that itself I could actually see for something fun, though. I also wouldn't mind, because like you were going back to Home Alone, even though that movie is already brutal itself, I do wonder just how Billy Bob Thornton's character would react to, maybe getting, hit in the face with an iron or a paint can to the head, or just whether.
Luckily, he was self-medicating a lot, so he might be able to withstand some of the shots to the head.
Okay, then it would almost be like that Robot Chicken sketch when they crossed over Home Alone and Halloween, when Michael Myers went into the house and had no reaction to any of the things that happened. Yeah. And plus, that's something I also wouldn't mind seeing, like an expansion on Harry and Marv's characters or so.
Yeah, you could. I mean, you talk about darker remakes. If you wanted to get into the Harry and Marv backstory, you could get real dark.
Oh yeah, and in fact, we almost got at least a retelling of someone else's backstory. Because do you remember a Daniel Stern movie in the 90s called Bushwhacked?
Vaguely, but I definitely didn't see it.
Okay, because essentially it's about him as a crook on the run who gets mistaken for a scoutmaster and has to lead a bunch of kids through the mountains.
Yeah, I remember that premise.
And apparently, again, I can't confirm this, but at one point, this was meant to be like a spinoff of Marv after he had gotten done serving his sentence in jail and he'd gotten released.
He didn't move on to the wet bandit, or not the sticky bandit.
Yeah, apparently it would have been some like alternate timeline scenario where instead of going to New York City, he leads a bunch of Boy Scouts through the woods.
All right. Well, they considered it, and then they realized that probably wasn't the best movie.
Probably, because I will say, even though Bushwhacked is certainly not the best of movies, there's like a moment or two where, because the movie does go for a full PG-13, and this is 1984, it does allow for some darker jokes. Like the one I always laugh at is when all these kids start crowding around Daniel Stern, asking him about Mount Everest. Just like, Everest? Yeah, sir. Tell me, what was it like climbing Mount Everest? And then, surrounded by the kids and parents, he's like, it was. But then he just blurts out, it was a bitch.
Well, he was good. He's a very entertaining actor, so I could see him making something from it.
Right, and of course, I mean, the movie itself. Those scenes are, don't really save the movie. But the one thing that almost does save it, if you can look it up on YouTube, are the TV ads for Bushwhacked, which are like the most forced marketing you'll ever come across. It's just showing like random clips from the movie and people like on the street yelling to the camera, "Bushwhacked fever!"
I'll check it out.
And I thought, Fox, did you really not see how forced this looks and how phony everything looks when you got?
Yeah, in that era, you got a lot of forced marketing.
Right. Yeah. And but maybe that's just like the joy out of seeing some of those old cheesy 90s ads. They're just too much fun to watch. But hey, overall, But what'd you think of this little survey I took you through?
It was enlightening. I mean, no more enlightening than the ice cream bunny. But yeah, it's fun to examine, and now you're gonna have me thinking about different remakes and different versions of Santas, and now I feel I'm gonna be studying every random movie and think, what if I could plug him in as Santa Claus, or what if I could make him the Heatmiser?
Well, now you got some material for the Christmas book edition too.
That's right. You've given me plenty to work with.
All right. Now, before we end things, why don't you tell our viewers, tell our listeners where they can find your book?
You can order it through local bookstores, but the easiest place is going to be Amazon. The Christmas book, Ed Daly, Daly. It's there. It's the ultimate guide to your favorite holiday. And if you want to reach my website, it's EZEDDALY, Easy Ed Daly, and that'll point you to everywhere that you need to be. If you want to find that book, or if you want to buy my history book, or if you want to see Instagram, Twitter, all those things, EZEDDALY.
Okay, well, there you go, everybody. There's where you can find Ed Daly's The Christmas Book, which, as I said myself, I've done some reading through it, and it is a great read. And I really hope that you all enjoyed our little interview, and hopefully pretty soon we'll have more interviews to come.
Thank you for joining us on this sleigh ride into the magical world of Christmas movies. Check us out for weekly rides into your favorite Christmas classics and their histories. Be sure to give us a positive review on iTunes if you like what you heard. And don't forget to follow us on social media on Facebook and Instagram for updates and special news. Consider subscribing on Patreon in order to help keep the show going and to gain access to some special gifts not available to the public. Merry Monday to all, and to all a good night. See you next week.
Cut. Okay, everybody, that's a wrap.